It was good of you to come out, man, Alex said over the foam of his fifth beer. It's been too long. It has been, hasn't it? Alex and I had been best friends in college, but these days we barely saw each other, even though we lived in the same town. There was a long silence. Our eyes drifted to the game on the screen above the bar. Alex scratched at something beneath his ear. Look, I know I haven't done the best job of keeping in touch. As Alex muttered, his itching intensified. I don't know what's wrong with me. Hey man, life gets in the way, I understand. I clapped him on the shoulder. No, I mean... As my friend leaned in close, I noticed his eyes, bloodshot and animal-wide and marble-round. Had I missed it before? I mean, Alex whispered, I don't know what's wrong with me. Some instinct made me want to pull back when Alex moved even closer and lifted his earlobe. He pointed to a little scar, about 2 inches long and closed with stitches. Have you seen anything like that before? Did you, have an operation or something? I asked, confused. It looks fine. No! Alex pounded the table with his fist and his face screwed up in a mask of anger. Our drink sloshed and spilled. I felt the irritated glances of other patrons on the back of my neck. No, that's just it. I woke up and felt this itch. Then I touched this place on my neck and found this cut, like a surgical cut, and a pair of stitches. Now, I ask you, how could something like that happen without me noticing? I bought some time with a long sip of beer. No idea, man. That's, pretty strange. And that's not all, Alex hissed. I felt off ever since. I wake up sore, but I don't remember any workout, or I try to remember what I did at a certain time of day, let's say between 6 and 9 o'clock, and I get nothing. Or even worse, I get these vague memories that seem like they were pieced together from other ones. They feel fake. They feel implanted. I frowned. My old pal was starting to sound like the guy I passed on my way to work, talking to pigeons in the park. I was afraid for him, but I was also afraid of him. Have you tried seeing a doctor? I ventured. Or maybe a psychologist? I can't, Alex sighed. I mean, I literally can't. I tried to book an appointment, but when the time comes, I'm not there. I get voicemails from the office saying they'll bill me anyway. The worst part is that sometimes I do remember going, but I know the memory isn't real. That's why I called you. I needed to know that something from my past was actually real. I didn't know what to say to that, and I guess it showed. You don't believe me, do you? Well, I chose my words carefully. I believe you're going through something, and I believe you need help. Alex rolled his eyes and bunched his hands into fists. Okay, try this then. Walk around the bar, act normal, nothing suspicious, but look at the space just behind people's ears. Then come back and try to tell me that there isn't something seriously wrong here. If I was going to get help for Alex, I needed to appease him for the moment. So I did what he asked. It's not like I actually expected to find anything. I made a big show of standing up and pretending to search the bar for a friend. And as I did, I started to notice. The 30-something woman with a bob cut and hoop earrings, the Mexican bartender bobbing his head to the music while mixing drinks, the trio suits laughing at something on an iPhone. These, and at least 20 more, had a mark just like Alex's, just behind an earlobe. So fine and well hidden that I'd never have noticed if I wasn't already looking. I circled the bar in a daze, counting the scars I saw. What the hell could it mean? As I did, I felt suspicious eyes following me. Was it just me, or the ones with the stitches watching my every move, like they knew what I was looking for? Right? Alex asked. One look at my pale, shocked face must have told him everything he needed to know. He leaned back on his stool, looking tense, but smugly satisfied. Okay, I panted. It was hard to get control of myself. What could be happening here? You tell me, Alex grunted. But I know this much. Once, just once, after the stitches first appeared, I think I came back to my senses when I wasn't supposed to. I was standing in this hotel lobby that I'd never seen before with a bunch of people I didn't know. They must have realized that something was up, because all their faces snapped towards me. They had this, concerned look, but it was the same look, the same expression on every face. That's what freaked me out. And then Alex shut his eyes tight, like he was afraid of his own words. It's okay, I squeezed on his shoulder. Go on. And then I felt something squirm inside my neck, deep inside, on the other side of that horrible little cut. I tried to grab it, but it was too deep. It kept wriggling. I tried to fight it, but it's like it was taking me over again. And the rest of them grabbed me, and everything went black. Alex started hyperventilating. Was it just a light, or could I see something writhing near his throat? Almost like his intense emotions were making it uncomfortable. There were a lot of whispers and worried looks toward our table, but only the stitched ones who I noticed before watching unblinkingly, like hawks. When I came back, I was sitting on the couch in my living room with the TV on, staring into space. You have no idea how much I grabbed and squeezed and prodded myself. I tried to feel that thing again, but it was gone, back deep inside of me. Alex held out his palms and looked at them helplessly. So, how can I really know? How can I know if I'm me or if I'm it? Tell me you understand, man. Tell me I haven't lost it. I thought you were crazy, I admitted. Then I indicated the 20-odd faces staring motionlessly at our table. I don't anymore. A huge shadow fell over our spilled drinks. The bouncer. There's going to be a problem here, he grunted. I fixated on the stitches behind his ear, and my blood ran cold. No, I murmured weakly, no problem. The bouncer snorted, hovered for a long moment, then lumbered off. By the time he did, though, something had changed. It was Alex's posture. The way he held his beer, his smile, everything. Just a few seconds had passed, but I was convinced that I was no longer looking at the same man. Ha! He laughed, gesturing to the screen. Did you see that goal? Nothing in Alex's glazed-over eyes gave any indication of the conversation we'd just been having. Yeah, I tried to laugh. That's crazy. I'm gonna head to the bathroom real quick. I stood, and as I did, I noticed that about 3 other guys stood up with me. I sat back down. They did as well. You okay, man? Alex asked with a wide smile. The Alex who I remembered barely gave more than a half smirk, even at the best of times. Yeah, man, I nodded. Just tired. Maybe I'll just head home. I wondered how the hell I was going to get out of that place. If there were enough normal people around, they wouldn't dare to hurt me, right? So soon? Alex grabbed my wrist. His smile had become a sneer, and his hand was cold. Have another drink. The bartender plonked a murky cocktail down on the table beside me, and I felt sure that if I drank it, I'd never be myself again. With a clumsy swoop of my elbow, I knocked it off the high table. Ah, sorry. Here, I'll order another one. I took advantage of the shattered glass that slip of the stool. I made for the bar, but at the last second, I swerved left and bolted for the door. Hey, the bartender shouted over the music. That guy hasn't paid. The patrons, stitched and unstitched alike, turned to watch the spectacle of my clumsy flight. I ducked under the bouncer's arms, slammed my shoulder into the door. I was free, until a hand, big as a dinner plate, closed on my shoulder. "Dine and Dashers get taken to the back room," he growled breathily into my ear. The giant bouncer twisted my arm until the pain screamed in my brain and burst like bright lights behind my shut-tight eyes. It was so intense that I hardly noticed I was being steered into an alley behind the bar. A rusted door squeaked open at the end of the alley. There was only darkness inside. 3 or 4 figures stood beside it, waiting for what? To give me a little cut and 2 stitches? I think seeing what awaited me at the end of that alley gave me a burst of adrenaline that allowed me to overcome the pain, dislocate my shoulder, and run for my car. I think I must have somehow unlocked my car door and gotten inside without being caught, and then driven back to my apartment in a panic to check something. I think that's what happened, but I can't be sure, because I just looked in the mirror and found 2 little stitches behind my ear.
I, a 23-year-old female, just wanted to share what I would call my first real encounter. Even as a lifelong skeptic, I can't explain this. If you're familiar with U.S. ghost hunting spots, you might have heard of the Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee, Arizona. It has been open since 1902 and has been the subject of multiple paranormal investigations and shows, and there are supposedly 3 documented ghosts who inhabit it. That of a drowned child, a man in a top hat, and a forlorn prostitute. My boyfriend and I decided on Saturday morning that we would take a trip to make up for a missed birthday. We had never gone on a real trip together, so we didn't plan it well at all. We just realized that we were about an hour and a half from Bisbee and decided to book a hotel once we got there. We chose the Copper Queen because it was the most prominent hotel in the area and is right in the middle of everything. We weren't aware of its reputation as a paranormal hotspot. The room itself was antique-looking, as expected with a hotel that old. Yellowing wallpaper, splintering wood floors, dim lighting. The locks on the door were pretty flimsy, and you had to actively yank it shut or it would fall open again. We joked that it looked like the Tower of Terror. After a day of walking around, we came back to get changed. We heard a creaking noise, and I had Coop check under the bed, only half seriously, but I was still relieved that nobody was there. We grabbed a lighter and went out for a smoke, then came back, showered, watched TV for a little while, and then turned out the lights. The moment that we shut the lights off, there was a variety of clicks, creaks, and pops in odd patterns. It being an old room, and us being a logical couple, we figured that it was the old fan or the wall-mounted AC. I was just listening to the noises when I felt Coop freeze up next to me. "Is that you?" I responded no, that it was the AC. "Not that. Seriously, is that you?" I asked him what he meant and waited for a minute or so before asking again and again. Finally, he answered. "I was trying to listen, babe. I hear someone breathing." We reasoned that it was the room next door and settled back into our pillows, and then I remembered that there wasn't another room on that side. Our room was the first on the landing, and the side that we were closest to, the side that Coop would have been able to hear, if at all, was the main staircase. Coop, being a 21-year-old boy, is blessed with the ability to fall asleep within seconds. I could hear him snoring, and his legs were over mine, but I was too anxious to sleep. I then felt the lightest tap on top of the quilt, just next to my feet. I froze, but tried to reason with myself that Coop had just twitched in his sleep, although his legs were still on top of mine. A few moments passed and I thought that I had imagined it, and then I felt a pinch/tugging motion at the same area of the quilt. I woke up Coop and demanded that he check under the bed again. I was still reasoning that there was a non-supernatural explanation for the events, and it occurred to me that although we had checked before leaving our walk, we hadn't checked after. The flimsy lock and the fact that the door was difficult to close made it seem likely that someone could have snuck in. Coop was too groggy to be useful, so I grabbed my phone, turned the flashlight on, and leapt as far from the bed as I could while crouching to check what was under it. Nothing. We were both a little freaked out by this point and agreed to turn the TV back on to drown out any weird noises. We turned on Futurama and settled back into bed for the third time. Again, Coop fell asleep within seconds. I was drifting off when I heard the audio on the TV kind of cut somehow. It suddenly shifted tone to where it sounded like a grainy VHS instead of a streaming adult cartoon. I heard a woman saying something about a phantom, and then a blood-curdling scream from the TV. At this point, I was too scared to open my eyes, so I steadied my breathing and pretended to be asleep. That's the last event that I could recall, and upon checking out the next day, the manager asked if we had experienced anything. That's when we Googled the hotel and found out its history of hauntings. So there it is. Nothing too crazy compared to other posts here, but I have definitely never experienced anything like that before and don't have an explanation besides the paranormal. Last night was awfully weird. I was in my childhood home, but at my current age. As I opened the door to my grandmother's room, it suddenly swung back and forth while my hands were still holding it from the side, not the doorknob, and it pulled me forcefully into the room and onto the floor. I felt a cold sweat coming on, but suddenly realized that I had to toughen up and shake it off. I screamed something like, "This is my house! You have no right to scare me! How dare you!" over and over again. I came close to the door and would hear a faint, high-pitched, distorted, tee-hee kind of laugh. Then I woke up. I thought it was already around 6 a.m. because that's usually the time when my alarm goes off. As I grabbed my phone, I was surprised to see that the time was actually 3:07 a.m. I already felt partially awake, as anyone who wakes up at 6 a.m. would. Now I have to force myself back to sleep or I'll feel awful in the morning. I play some ambient sleep sounds from Alexa while I observe the room, anxiously expecting something out of the ordinary, but nothing happened. I fell back asleep, and in my next dream, I was at a hospital with a group of people that I don't know, but somewhere we were grouped together. There's about 5 or 6 of us in a room, with a dead person in the bed, covered with a sheet. As I left the room, I saw 2 more of the people in our group suddenly appear in a different room, somewhat helping each other put another dead body into a hospital bed while the family weeps. I went back to see the rest of the group in the original room, trying to position the dead body to sit up. The dead guy is of mixed Chinese descent, a bit overweight, and bald. Then some information came into my head that he used to own a restaurant or a bar. As they moved his torso upwards, they failed, and the dead body dropped onto the floor. This is when things start to get really weird, because the dead guy woke up like he was startled from his sleep. He stood up and started chasing us, accusing us of killing him. His bowels were a mess, and I could see a stab wound on his belly and on his lower back. I ran away in a long corridor and found myself in the nurse's changing room. It had open cubicles like the ones from football players' dressing rooms, with scrubs and casual clothes alike hanging on the wall. I was partially covered in the dead guy's bodily fluids, so I washed up. Then a nurse found me. I looked terrified of what happened, so I explained the situation to her and led her to that room. The nurse came in and started to comfort the dead guy. He began to calm down and sat beside the nurse, then closed his eyes. The nurse looked at me, and without talking, some information came into my mind. I learned that he was a hopeless case, so they just let him lie down until he dies, as he was already in the process of dying when we startled him. After that moment, I woke up, and this time it was truly 6 a.m., 6:30-ish already. I didn't feel any dread as you would in a nightmare. I did a bit of research on dream meanings, but I felt that it didn't fit with me. Then I found out the significance of 3:07 a.m. from the movie The Conjuring, so I thought the exact time was just a coincidence, since it's just a movie. I could not remember the last time I woke up in the middle of the night. It would be very, very rare that it's not worth remembering. But waking up at 3 a.m. with 2 weird dreams will definitely stay with me forever. About 10 years ago, I moved into a new home in Indiana with 3 roommates. I won't go into too much detail about where the home is located out of respect for my former roommates, one of which still lives there. I will say that it is located in a very old part of town, a few blocks off of one of the very first main roads that used to be in the town, that was settled in 1846, I believe. Anyway, this house was definitely not what comes to mind when you picture a haunted house. It was built sometime in the early 80s or early 90s. It was pretty ordinary looking. 3 bedrooms with a small loft area, tiny bathrooms, and not a whole lot of room for 4 adults to spread out. But when you're a college student in your early 20s and have the opportunity to split rent 4 ways, this seemed perfect. We had all our own tiny little spaces, shared a kitchen and living room, and spent most of our time just bullshitting around the dining room table. The house was owned by an older couple who lived in a city about 20 minutes away. They began renting the home out to help finance their retirement. They were sweet, and pretty relaxed on any rules for the home. They told us right off the bat that they were not physically fit enough to do any maintenance or repairs on the house should anything go wrong, so we were told to call them with any issues, and they would send over their handyman, or whichever professional was needed. They never came to the house. Not once. We paid rent by money order through the mail. I didn't find this strange at the time. The first weird event occurred about a week after we all moved in. We all worked the night shift at our respective jobs, so the house was empty all night, and we arrived home around the same time early in the morning. We dragged ass into the living room to enjoy some sort of fast food breakfast before passing out when we realized that the entire carpet downstairs was soaked. A pipe had burst beneath our dishwasher during the night and flooded the kitchen, dining room, and living room. Our landlords had the floor replaced within a week, and we went on with our lives. Then, about a week later, we were baking cookies in the oven when all of a sudden the cookies burst into flames. The oven was producing so much heat that I was afraid that the whole thing would catch on fire. The landlord sent a repairman who told us that something had caused the internal thermometer in the oven to be so uncalibrated that you could set the oven temp to 300 degrees, but it would be more like 475 in there. Again, we had it fixed and moved on. It wasn't long after that when the unexplainable and unnerving activity began. The ceiling fans in the rooms would turn on randomly, and they would spin so hard that they would rattle and shake to the point that it looked like the thing was about to fly off of the ceiling. Every room was equipped with button switches. There are 4 buttons on the wall, 1 for the light and the other 3 for various speeds for the fan. The fan would make a 2-tone chiming noise when you would push the button to turn it on. No one would be able to turn on a fan without pretty much everyone in the house hearing this chime. We were creeped out, but chalked it up to faulty wiring or a power surge. That chime still haunts my dreams. Then came the TV issue. We all pulled together to buy a large flat-screen TV for our living room, brand new, name brand, extra warranty. The TV would turn on by itself constantly. We returned it to the store, exchanging it for a new one, and thought it would be fine. We would be outside or in a different room and hear the chime, go turn the fan off, and realize that the TV had just turned itself on. This happened 5 or 6 times a day. It was unable to be ignored. 2 separate things in 2 different rooms turning on almost simultaneously. The electrician was called. He found no signs of faulty wiring, and I think he thought we were making it up. After months of this, we began to hear the whistling. 3 notes whistled by an unseen force at all times during the day. This would usually happen when you were in a room by yourself. I would get this sick, anxious feeling like I was being watched, and right then, I would hear the whistle. Someone or something wanted our attention, and he got it. 3 of us were totally convinced that our house was haunted. Our other roommate was a skeptic, and also pretty much had to make this living situation work, or he would be sleeping in his car. About a year and a half of living in this house, dealing with constant phenomena, it ramped up again. We would be in the kitchen making dinner, go eat in the living room, and come back to find every cabinet door open. Sometimes the refrigerator and oven doors were open too. This happened probably 3 or 4 times a week, on top of all the other crap. I was over it, but had no idea how to fix it. I went to Borders bookstore and got a few books about ghosts and hauntings and different information about getting rid of the creepies in one's home. I decided to do a smudging, and I could not have been more sorry about that decision. We planned to do all the sage smudging together, and our Catholic roommate also had his priest come in and do a house blessing that same day. Holy oil and water were sprinkled in each room, the smell of white sage burning. We thought it was over. The next morning, I was walking downstairs like I had a million times before, when my feet completely flew out from under me and I was airborne. I remember thinking, this isn't possible, right before I smashed into the stairs. I landed on my back, right at the edge of them. Picture Lucy pulling the football away before Charlie Brown can kick it, and his tiny feet are kicking in the air. I was Charlie Brown. I landed not on my butt or side, but squarely on my thoracic spine, the upper area of my spine. How on earth did I defy gravity? I had now tripped. I was barefoot on carpeted stairs, sober, and holding the railing. I didn't feel a push. I felt a sweeping force take my legs out from under me. I broke 4 vertebrae in my back, about parallel with my shoulder blades. I've had injections and nerve damage and back braces and a chronic pain that isn't normal for someone in their 20s. I began to look for a new place to live. I found out that I was pregnant with my son about 2 months later, and decided that the risk was too great to live in that house pregnant, so I packed up that night, told my roommates that I would continue to pay my portion of the rent until our lease was up, and moved back in with my parents. I was only staying with my parents for about a month before finding a new safe place for my baby, my now husband, and I. But I lived constantly on edge thinking, what if it followed me? It didn't. What did follow me are the nightmares where I relive the feeling of terror and dread washing over me, and every so often, I can still hear the whistle. Myself and a few friends go on a road trip every summer to visit haunted places. In 2018, we stayed at a haunted hotel in the northeastern United States and had to sign a safety waiver just to stay there. It was a small country hotel, and the only other party had canceled, so we had the place to ourselves with our tour guide. We had a spirit box type of device, which I've been skeptical of, but we all carried on conversations. There was a moment where I heard my name through the box, when I had never said my name, and even said my full name. I prefer a shortened version. We spent a lot of time upstairs in a room where the quote-unquote ladies of the night would sleep, and I was prohibited from sitting on the bed by a spirit that was allegedly the ladies' bodyguard. I sat down only for a few seconds, and as soon as I stood, the bed lifted up and dropped, scaring the hell out of me, and at least one of my friends witnessed this. We went upstairs to an unfinished floor that was under renovation. There was an old ornate chair that was used by a notorious Irish mafia hitman that stayed at the hotel frequently. We went in a circle saying our names to see if the spirit, Joe, would let one of us sit in the chair. I said mine, and a light that we were using started to flicker like crazy. This is especially odd because I have red hair, and as far as I know, I was the only one in our group of Irish descent. Our guide asked if he was sure that he wanted me to sit there, and he replied, "F yeah," through the box. I took the invitation and sat in the chair, and oddly enough, I felt some kind of strange power surge through me. I eventually stood and thanked Joe, and from the spirit box I heard, "You're welcome." Later that night is when the real event happened. Our guide said, "Now, I don't normally do this, but since there are only 4 of you, I'd like to take you down to the morgue." It wasn't so much of a morgue, but it was stone walls and a dirt floor, and it was cold as hell. We were in a corner of the room when our guide said, "I don't want to scare you, but there's something standing right behind you." I saw a shadow on the wall, but it was cast by my friend B. That's when B moved to the side, and there was another shadow underneath his. It was taller than anyone in the room, and gave off an intimidating presence. I looked back, and saw no one standing in front of the light source, and when I looked back again, there was no shadow. I've always been skeptical, but believed in the supernatural to a degree. Believe me when I say that basement had something seriously dark down there. Something evil. I have never felt so vulnerable in my life. The whole night we felt like we were being watched, and could hear footsteps around the hotel. I'd love to go back and get some more evidence someday. I've done paranormal investigations for a few years now, but that one night stay at that hotel was enough to completely convince me. There is definitely something beyond death, and perhaps the most terrifying part, not everything on that side is friendly. About 11 years ago, a group of friends and myself drove to Mineral Wells, Texas for a spontaneous midnight exploration of the long-abandoned and supposedly haunted Baker's Hotel. It was incredibly creepy inside. The place was pitch black and littered with old pieces of dusty, moldy furniture and decor from the 50s and 60s, whenever it was last operating. The first thing that freaked us out was that it sounded like the building was breathing. And loudly. Turned out it was just flooding in the basement that was echoing through the elevator shafts. Anyways, we started exploring everywhere. By the time we got to the 7th floor, we were a little disappointed that nothing weird had happened yet. The adrenaline was kinda wearing off. We started walking down this long hallway on the 7th floor, peeking into various rooms and peering around with our flashlights. All of a sudden we heard a door, coming from the end of the hallway we were moving toward, slowly open, and then slowly close. It was creaking very loudly, just like in a scary movie. It scared us, and we froze. We were close enough that our flashlights reached the door in question. It was some kind of small, weird door, framed inside of a larger, regular door. My friend wanted to turn around and leave. We thought maybe there was a homeless person in there, and they were trying to scare us off. Nonetheless, I convinced him to keep going because I had to go in the room now. We started walking slowly toward the door, all the while saying stuff out loud like, "We're just exploring, if someone's in there, we're just messing around," things like that. We were probably about 15-ish feet away when the door suddenly began opening again, eerily and slowly like before. However, this time it slammed shut, right in front of our eyes. Again, we were scared frozen. Again, I insisted that we keep going. A minute or so later, we worked up the courage and just barged right in that door as fast as we could. What was in there? Absolutely nothing. There was no possible explanation for whatever had opened and closed and then slammed that door. There were no cracked windows allowing for the airflow from outside. There was nothing. We shut the door behind us and sat down in nervous disbelief, and then chain smoked a couple of cigarettes each. We finally left and actually went through the rest of the building. The dream I just had was one of the most prophetic that I have ever had. I have gotten into the habit of listening to historical documentaries while I sleep, and one of them just made its way into my dream. Let me explain. I was sitting on a bed in a broken-down old house when I started hearing an animal screaming in pain outside. I run to the window, and I see an older man, and who I can only assume is his wife outside this house, with a strongly malnourished panther that is on the ground in front of them. The older man has a whip, and is raising it up before I yell to stop, and the panther jumps up, climbs up the side of the wall to my window, and the large jungle cat climbs inside. I start to close the window, and the man starts to scream to give me his animal back to him. I only flip him the bird, and then turn to help the animal. I leave to go get some meat and a bed and whatever else I think the animal might need when I get back. It's nighttime. I walk back in, and I see the panther laying with his head on my pillow, asleep. I turn around to put the stuff down and close the door, and when I turn back, he's sitting up, staring at me. I apologize to him for waking him up, and I show him the meat. I tell him that I don't want him chewing on me next time he gets hungry, and he says, "I couldn't." At this point, I'm completely caught off guard, and I just stare at him. He continued, "You saved me. I would never eat you. My name is Ramses." I smile at him and introduce myself while placing the meat in front of him. As he finishes up, he looks up at me and says, "Thank you. I wish I could be here on happier terms, but I have a message about this world and all of its humans. This world will have to face judgment in an endless desert. So much was given, and so much was ruined. Now there will be nothing. I'm sorry." I let him know that I understood, and I thank him for his message. Suddenly, the house around me begins to shake and crumble. Just before a large piece of wall falls on me, I wake up. In 2011, my older cousin bought a small, 2-bedroom, single house in a quiet neighborhood for retired folks. The house was very small, with only 850 square feet of interior space, but it sat on a large plot of land. We could have easily fit 2 more houses like it on that lot, and still would have nice leftover space for yards and gardening. I was still a college student at that time, and I lived with my cousin. When he bought the house, I moved in with him. There were the 2 of us living there. According to the real estate agent, the house had been abandoned for around 3 years. The previous owner basically left it unmaintained and moved to a different state. The house had 1 main floor, a small attic, and an unfinished basement. The first time we walked in, the floorboards were already rotted out. We could see the basement through them. Everything was in horrible condition, and we would have to do major restoration to make it livable again. The property also had a small storage shed in the back of the lot. My cousin got a great offer, so he took the deal without much hesitation. Weird things started to happen when we began our restoration work. One day we were working on the bathroom. My cousin told me that he had to go to Home Depot for some stuff, and so he left. I heard him open the door, go outside, close it, turn on his car, and drive away. I was taking apart the old boards that were nailed on the bathroom walls. My back was facing the bathroom door. 5 minutes after my cousin left, the bathroom door, which was open, started to slowly move to the closed position. I knew this because I could hear the creaky old door sound that it made. I turned around and saw the door continue to close on its own. Then it stopped just as it touched the door frame and bounced back a little. I thought maybe it's just the wind. Then, suddenly the door pulled itself shut tightly, as if there was someone on the other side of the door. It happened right in front of me. I was only 4 feet away. No wind could have done that. Plus, all the windows were closed around the house, so there couldn't possibly be any form of breeze. You might think that maybe the AC caused it, but no. This old house did not have central AC. We had to put in window AC units afterward. At this point, I thought my cousin was messing with me, so I called out to him, but there was no response. Just silence. I opened the door, continued to call for him, telling him to stop playing around. But my cousin was not there. I checked the parking lot, and he was, in fact, gone. I even got outside and did a perimeter check, but no one was there, and I still cannot explain what happened. After the restoration was done, we moved in. My cousin sometimes went on business trips for weeks, and there would just be me in the house. The following happened whenever I was alone. One night I was studying and had my headphones on. I heard sounds of someone walking around in the basement, which was directly below my bedroom. It sounded like they had slippers on, and I could hear the sound of them dragging on the concrete floor with each step. What's weird was that I could not pinpoint exactly which direction in which it was coming from. It's a strange sensation when the sounds were coming from the back of my head, as if they were just right behind me. The only reason that made me think that it's the basement was because the basement was the only area in the house that had concrete and that could have made the concrete slipper dragging sound. So I took out my headphones, and the sounds of the footsteps still went on. The volume of the sounds stayed the same, with or without the headphones. I thought my cousin had come home early, so I called out to him and got no reply. I took the flashlight and went to the basement to check it out. It was dark and quiet. No one else was there. This happened 3 or 4 more times within the first 2 months that I lived in that house. After that, I didn't experience anything unusual anymore. My cousin never felt or saw anything weird, but he seemed interested in my stories. His girlfriend, now wife, who had been to the house every other week or so, also expressed her uneasy feelings during her stays. By 2016, during a thunderstorm, the thunder struck our storage shed in the backyard and burned everything inside it. Luckily, the house was untouched. I came home from work only to find a police officer waiting at the front. He told me what had happened and said that it was an act of God and that our insurance would compensate for the loss. In our Asian culture, people say that when thunder strikes somewhere, often it is to strike down a malevolent force or spirit. We quickly formed the realization that this thunder strike was more than just an accident. I got my own place and moved out a few months after the fire. My cousin bought another house with his wife a year after that. He still owns the creepy house, and it's been left unoccupied since 2017. He plans to tear down the old house and build a larger one to take advantage of the large plot of land. The experiences at this house were the closest I've got to what could be considered paranormal. So, I've always had hyper-realistic dreams. I also have always believed that my dreams are how God talks to me. I know that sounds a little crazy. Regardless, the other night I had a dream that I believe is a sign. I also should say that my walk in faith has been wavering in the past year, and I've also been going to see psychics a few times a year since last December. Anyway, to the dream. I believe I was on a road trip with a couple of my buddies. We stopped at a little diner in a small town that had a psychic, gimmicky store attached to it. I was waiting for my friends to use the bathroom, and when they both came out, they both said that they wanted to go and do a reading. I said all right, and that I would wait for them to be done. They went through this black-lit corridor through a purple-curtained doorway. They came back out not too long after, all smiling and cheerful. They told me that I should do a reading, but something didn't feel right. I've always been sensitive to energies in general, but there was something about this place. They kept tugging me when all of a sudden the psychic came out. Immediately, all the alarms were going off in my head. She came up to me and got really close to my face. She had these bulging eyes, and her face was full of super white makeup, really heavy eyeshadow and eyeliner. Her hair was a fire truck red, and slicked back into a bun with feathers and things sticking up. She was really freaking me out, but I was like, alright, whatever, so we start. She grabs me by the shoulders, and we make very intense eye contact, and she starts telling me a bunch of things like I have the gift, something that I already know. And we start backing away almost like a dance, and then we both get on all fours and drop down on our bellies, and she starts to slither toward me. Literally, slithering, without using her hands. This is when I know something is actually really up. I stop everything. I stand up, and am telling her that I'm done. She is still slithering toward me. She then slithers all the way up my body until her face meets mine. Then she says, "Let me show you the way." I say no. This makes her super angry, and she picks me up by my throat and keeps chanting, "Let me show you the way, let me show you the way." She starts running with me in her hand, and the room keeps elongating, so she keeps running. Then snakes start coming out of her sides, and they burrow into my skin. I feel the pain of them digging into me and biting me. I'm grabbing onto her wrists, and I scream, "No! There is only one way. God is the way." And I scream this while making eye contact, and she starts screaming bloody murder. And I get the strength to gouge out her eyes with my thumbs. More snakes and spiders begin pouring from her eye sockets, and I scream that again, that God is the way. And that's when I woke up. In 2001, I was big into ghost hunting. I was looking online for a haunted weekend road trip destination and came across the Jefferson Hotel in Jefferson, Texas. About the only thing it said was that room 19 was quote-unquote uninhabitable. Now that really piqued my interest, so I called them up and asked if it was true. The lady at the front desk laughed and just said no, we book that room all the time. So I reserved it. I was so excited, but didn't really think that anything would happen. I'd been to several supposedly haunted hotels and B&Bs and had no results. Now, I'm not sensitive like some people. I always hear people say, "I felt like someone was watching me." I have no idea what that means. The only thing I noticed when I walked in the room was a faint, musky smell of an old-fashioned perfume. I set up a recorder in the room and headed out to explore the town. It was like going back in time. If you live in Texas and are looking for a road trip, I highly recommend Jefferson. When I got back to the room, I turned off the recorder and looked out its one window to see a large bust of Thomas Jefferson in the courtyard. I then sat down on the bed to relax and watch some TV. After a bit, something caused me to look back up at the window, and I saw something. A red smudge on the glass. I frowned and got up to see what it was. I hadn't noticed any red smudges earlier. I looked closely. It was more like a streak of red in a greasy substance of some sort. Then I noticed more streaks, and then more. I gradually began to realize that these were letters. My heart began to race as I backed up to take it all in. These streaks of red were spelling out, "Help me." I kind of just collapsed on the bed, my heart still racing. I knew without a doubt in my mind that those letters were not there 15 minutes earlier. I just sat in disbelief for about 5 minutes. Needless to say, there was not much sleep to be had that night. As I left the hotel the next morning, I was disappointed to see that there was no one behind the desk. I really needed to talk to someone. I left a note about the writing and said that I would call them on Monday. When I called, I told the woman who answered who I was, and she said, "Hold on just a moment." She put the housekeeping lady on the phone. I asked, "Did you see it?" She said, "Yes, I saw it." And then she said, "Just before you arrived, I raised the blinds and turned on the AC. There was no writing. And the strangest thing was when I attempted to clean it off. She said that it was like the letters had been engraved into the glass." I told her that I was freaked out, and she confirmed that she was too. By the way, on the way home I listened to the tape that I had had running in the room while I was gone. What I heard was the sound of the closet door angrily slamming several times and something shuffling around. But what really got to me was the sound of a woman sobbing. I want to start by saying that I'm no stranger to odd dreams. I have experienced sleep paralysis many a time throughout my life. I had a dream shadow stalker for years, and I used to have a haunted bed frame that gave me some of the worst night terrors I've ever had. I have shaman blood on my dad's side, and I myself have been studying various aspects of the occult and paranormal for over a decade. But those stories are for another post. I'm just used to this sort of thing. I wanted to express that. That leads me here. Not sure if anyone's felt this as well, but I have been a ball of anxiety lately. Obviously related to the uncertainty in the world and all, yet I still shouldn't feel it this much. The dreams I've been experiencing have been extremely strange. Like I said, I have vivid, lifelike dreams constantly, but typically they're broken up. I have been having Inception-style dreams for the past 2 months every time I go to sleep. Like I'll dream of actually waking up and going about my day, but then I actually wake up. It's so disorientating. Last night, I had a very weird dream. The strangest of them all. I can't recall what I was doing, but I remember distinctly being in a dark, dusty room. The only part I truly know is that there was some kind of box or container with a lid in front of me. Everything was in first person. It felt so real. I lifted the box, and laying in it were 2 dead gray mice. They were stiff and curled towards each other, like a heart almost. That's all I can remember. I only remembered specifically because my significant other said something about a mouse this morning. I did some investigation and read that this could mean a period of financial instability, but was curious to see if anyone else had any ideas. I work at the front desk of a hotel, and within the last 6 months, we had a guest that passed away in one of our rooms. Because of this pandemic, my boss has blocked off the room, even after deep cleaning, just to be safe. Due to the hotel business not doing well, he also had a couple of rooms cut off from power, which means that none of the electronics are working for those rooms. Now, our hotel has 2 phones up at the front, one for external calls and the other specifically for internal lines, which are only connected to the phones in each guest room. I was having a quiet day during my shift alone. Business isn't running as normal, and all the housekeepers had left for the day, and the only staff there was the maintenance guy and I. I get an internal phone call from one of the rooms and answer it as I usually do, and it's just static noises, along with an occasional cut-in between, like the noise that you get when you unplug your headphones from a device. I didn't think anything of it at first, and thought that it was a guest accidentally calling the front desk, so I waited a little bit to hang up. Then I realized that the call was from the same room where the guest had passed away, and that there was no way a call could be made from that room because the phone was unplugged. I was a little bit spooked, so I asked the maintenance guy, who was just chilling in the back office, to go and check out the room and make sure that the power was still out. He comes back and sure enough the phone is still unplugged, and he even took a picture of it. He also has a log of what rooms have power, electronics, etc. We even checked the lobby cameras to make sure that no one had gone into the rooms, and there was nothing. No housekeepers went in or out of the room at all within the past week. Just as we were done checking the camera footage, I received another call from that same exact room. And this time it was silent for a good 10 seconds or so, and then the same static noise, but this time much louder. I hung up the phone so fast, a guest asked if everything was okay. I didn't tell her. I tried to think of every scientific possible way that this could have been an internal mistake, such as an outside sales call accidentally getting caught within our internal call system, but that's just impossible to begin with, especially if the phone cord was not plugged in. Lately, I've been dreaming about pretty weird stuff. I can't remember everything, of course, but I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability. About 1 week ago, I started dreaming more often, and I could remember them clearly when I woke up. But after about 2 days, some inconsistencies popped up. At the end of the dream, I would start hearing weird noises. This, of course, didn't bother me until 2 days ago when I woke up very early, about 6 in the morning, and the sound was still there. I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and noticed that my window cover, a sliding cover since my roof is slanted, was pretty much wide open. My window is right under a streetlight, so I always close it because I need complete darkness to sleep. When I jumped up and turned on the lights in my room, the sound immediately stopped. It's hard to explain the noise, but it sounded like the flapping of a piece of clothing against the window. I'm pretty sure that it shouldn't have happened because that's my only window, and there is never any draft in my room. I decided to just go downstairs and forget about it since I was probably still just half asleep. This is where it got weird. I have a little decorative Captain America shield on the desk in my room, which is next to the door. This is important. I started dreaming normally, superpowers and stuff, until I somehow made it back to my home in my dream, and in my dream I sat down behind my desk with the door open. When I look out of the door from my desk, I see the closet doors from across the hall. In my dream, I remember that I started to fall asleep behind my desk, and I could see out of the corner of my eye that the closet door started to open. When I looked up and blinked, it was all normal again. This happened once more. But the third time I looked up, and the closet door kept opening. So I got scared and threw the Captain America shield at the closet door. In my dream, not in real life as far as I know. And then I jumped out of my bed, scared. When I turned the lights on at, again, 6 in the morning, the shield was gone, and lying on the floor next to me. I was very sure that that shield had been on my desk when I went to sleep. I will preface this by saying that I think I'm silly to believe in ghosts, and I get embarrassed to speak about it. The alternative to believing that I was haunted is admitting that I am much more mentally ill than I had ever believed, which is absolutely possible. This took place over a few years in a farmhouse in the desert of Arizona. It was newly developed land. We moved into the place when I was 15. At the time, I was going through a lot emotionally and smoking a lot of weed. That might explain some of my personal experiences, so I'll try not to dwell on them too much. The house was set up almost plantation style. It was very wide, had a big wraparound porch, and lots of awkward corners. The front room was a tall library, with an open balcony to the upstairs, which ran into long, skinny bedrooms. My parents' room was closest to the stairs, and was attached to a nursery with a sliding ensuite door. My brother's rooms, who were 2 years younger than me, and my room, were at the end of a dark hallway. That side of the house never got sun, so it had bad vibes all around. Downstairs, there was a messed up Harry Potter-style closet, a sunken-in living room, a kitchen in the center of the house, and a sunken playroom for the baby. It honestly started the first day that we moved in. My brother and I were the only ones in the house, and we were unboxing plates. It was so empty that everything in there echoed. I swear it sounded like a little girl laughed, like a creepy track that you could get off of an app or something. Keep in mind, the TVs were not plugged in. We were on an acre of land, far away from the dirt road, and my brother was way too stupid to pull a prank like that. I started hearing voices at night. This wasn't unusual. I honestly used to freak myself out so badly that I think I made noises up to scare myself. My parents had raised me not to talk about things scaring me, to tough it out and be a big girl. It was fine most of the time during the day. Everything bad came at night. I remember distinctly when it started messing with me in bed. In solidarity, my brother and I kept our bedroom doors open for the hallway's nightlight, and in case we needed to call for each other. We had a pretty messed up childhood that might have contributed to all the codependency I'll describe during this. I was falling asleep, but not quite out. I felt the blanket slipping off the bed and reached down to grab it. This was common. I didn't have a bed frame with a foot. It kept slipping no matter how I tried to tuck it. In classic horror movie fashion, the last time I pulled it, I felt tension. There was nothing it could have been caught on. I felt like the second I went from confused to terrified, it bounced back to me. I don't know how to explain this that well, but I was certain that someone was under the bed pulling it away from me. Later, I moved another nightlight into the bedroom. It was a kind of spooky amber orange, and I convinced my parents to let me paint the walls cherry red. Again, I was almost asleep, but not quite out, so I don't think it could have been sleep paralysis. I heard the carpet rustle, and maybe joints cracking. It sounded like my mom had come in to check on me. I opened my eyes, and immediately froze. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. There was a woman crawling across my floor from the far side of my room to the foot of my bed. She was pale and stringy-haired as if she were going bald. I couldn't see her face. I don't know how I fell asleep. I couldn't scream or move. I think she disappeared under my bed. But again, this could always be a hallucination. My baby brother was about 7 months old when she started coming out during the day. My mom was a teacher at the time and was able to stay home with us during summer vacation. It was lunchtime and we were watching a movie quietly downstairs while the baby napped. There were noises upstairs, as if something had been dropped to the ground. We listened for a second before my mom ran up. She thought the baby had fallen out of his crib. We opened the door and found him sound asleep. There was weird white stuff on the floor. It took us a while to figure out that it was drywall or something like that. There was a crawl space to a small attic where the AC and insulation could be reached. It was barely big enough to get into and a good 9 feet from the ground. It also had to be pushed up and slid over to open. there was a visible gap. The carpet was a really ugly dark blue, so we could see the white spots in the ground as if something had been dragged from one side of the room to where the crib was, and it stopped right in front of it. My mom checked the closet and called my stepdad. He couldn't leave work, so he stayed downstairs until he got home and checked the crawl space. We have never had animals. It's really difficult for most things to live in Arizona, so wildlife is pretty rare in that area. He didn't find anything, or signs of anything living up there. This happened every other day for 2 weeks. We really didn't know what to make of it. My mom thought it might be the AC suctioning the opening upward. It stopped and didn't happen again for 2.5 years, until my baby sister was born and stayed in the same crib. Again, it happened on and off for a few weeks, and never again. To keep my own solo experiences brief, I had a period of 3 months where I straight up did not sleep. I went crazy. Every night, I felt like my bed was shaking. The instant I laid my head down, it would vibrate, the metal frame would sway, and I would feel as if something was pushing the mattress between the baseboards or sitting on the corner. I had my brother touch the frame one night to tell me if the shaking was in my head or not. He said it wasn't, but I'm still not sure if he wasn't just playing into it. I thought I might be having seizures or something. At one point I got so frustrated I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with the dog. I started hearing whispers too. Not a noise that sounded odd, but someone calling my name. My name has 3 freaking syllables. I would be in my room, door open, doing something at night after my parents went to bed. It was a female voice, but it sounded off. I don't know how to explain it. The downstairs really scared me after the lights went out, so I never went down, but I did walk to the balcony and look. I never saw anything, but the whispering would stop when I got close. My brother started hearing it too. He's kind of weird. His life's dream has been enlisting in the army, so his reaction was always getting his knife and walking right downstairs to confront it. He would turn the lights on and look around before coming right back up. He slept on my floor a few nights because he was convinced that she wanted me. We had prior haunting experiences, which led to my parents making jokes that the ghosts follow us. They didn't pay much attention to it at the time when it was quiet. One night my parents went out with the babies. My brother and I were in our rooms, doors open per usual. We started hearing something strange. At first, I thought it was the wind. It got louder until it was clear that a woman was wailing. I know it sounds crazy, but it was so clear. We hid in my room for what felt like hours, calling my mom. For some reason, it never occurred to us to call the police. Eventually, the crying stopped. We hatched a plan to run for the stairs and out the nearest door. All of the lights were on in the house, and my brother has his stupid knives. It's like it knew that we were going to leave. We heard shuffling outside the door, and maybe breathing? I guess it could have been the air conditioning. We kind of decided that we were ready to die, unlocked the door, and booked it. The crying started again, and it was very clear that it was coming from my parents' room. We stood outside the property line for another hour waiting for them to arrive, watching the house. No one could have gotten out without us seeing. We had huge windows lining the upstairs hallway that showed everything with the lights on. My parents again made fun of us, and still do about that night. A few other incidents include my baby brother talking to the man upstairs. He would stand in front of the balcony and chat up to someone. He told us that the man was hiding in my room. He talked about the man in the window and would ask, "Who's that?" directed to the doors at night. I don't want to talk about all of it, but there were so many instances of voices, doors slamming, and things being knocked over in my room that I really did think I was losing my mind. I moved out at 18 and came back occasionally, usually to babysit. Apparently, my reluctant believer mother and absolute skeptic stepdad watched a coffee pot jump off of the counter. They were also outside sitting and having an open fire while drinking a coffee when they saw a figure in the balcony window of our room. It was a tall man, but my stepdad still needed urging to go upstairs. It appeared a second time, closer to where the nursery door was. My mom said she had horrible dreams about a man in the corner of her room after that. She was present for many of the instances where we heard footsteps upstairs, doors slamming when the AC was off, etc., but she always denied that there was anything wrong. Once my parents left town with the kids for a week. At this point I was 19 and living happily an hour away. My mom begged me to check on my brother and stay a few nights for the weekend. I arrived during the evening after I got off of work. I asked how had things been when he was alone. He said he was fine, he just didn't go upstairs at night and, quote-unquote, minded his business. He said if he ignored it and tried not to get scared, then it in return ignored him. He felt safe with the dog. We were watching YouTube and eating when we started to hear a deep noise. At first I thought it was a bike or one of the small buggies that people drove out here. Then I noticed that it was holding a tune. It was humming. The dog had a weird thing about staring into the bathroom if the door was open, which is scary at night. This time, the door was closed, and he still stood up and stared. The noise was so deep that it sounded as if it couldn't have been human, but it was definitely melodic. There's nothing I could think to figure out to try and explain it. My brother and I just kind of looked at each other. Then, a door slammed upstairs, and we decided to nope out of there and go for a walk. When we got back, I decided that I would sleep in my parents' room. It didn't feel right to stay in the kids' room, but looking back, it would have been best to stay close to my brother. I fell asleep surprisingly easy. I guess about 2 hours passed before my brother slammed the door open. The house smelled like it was burning. Not really like a fire smell, but more like burning plastic and trash. I was panicked. I was the adult and had no idea what to do in that situation. We checked the house. I turned off the air conditioning, thinking it might be on fire. We opened all the windows and fell asleep on the couches downstairs. The next day the smell was still lingering, but less overwhelming. The air conditioner was fine when I turned it back on. Like usual, the day was fine. That next night, my brother and I went on a Jack-in-the-Box run. It might have taken 30 minutes. We arrived home to a mess of blood, vomit, and shit. The dog was sick all over the living room. We immediately took him to an emergency vet, certain that he was dying. They checked him for everything that they could and gave him a clean bill. When we got home, all hell broke loose. My brother and I were cleaning up the mess with the doors open for airflow. There were absolutely insane banging noises coming from upstairs. We hadn't locked up on the way out. My brother thought that someone had snuck in and was trashing the place. He went up to check, and I hung out downstairs ready to call the cops if need be. Nothing happened. Nothing even seemed out of place. We kept cleaning, but the noise started almost immediately. It kind of sounded like someone was shouting behind a wall of cement. I couldn't tell the gender. My brother told me he had been fine until I got there, that I could leave if I wanted. I totally did, and I didn't go back. My parents sold the house this year. During the interim of the move, they stayed in an Airbnb. My brother lived really close to his work, so he stayed in the house with the dog for a few weeks. This story is just his own, so I'm not sure if I believe it. Like I said, he's kind of strange, but he's also not really one to embellish. He had been hearing the usual things, even his name being called in the night, but ignored all of it. His friends had been coming over to keep him company. The last day he was supposed to finish moving, he brought another friend. He says he felt that they were being watched the whole time when they cleared the place out, and his friend left him to lock up. They got into the car facing the house when they noticed that the blinds were open. They were definitely closed on the way out. His friend claims that he saw them open from the corner of his eye. My brother says that there is a woman squatting in front of a downstairs window, close to where he had just left from. She was pale, her nose was hooked, and her hair was black and stringy. Again, classic horror movie ghost. He said she had black eyes with visible white dots in the centers. Inside-out eyes, as he called them, and she was smiling. He says it took him a second of shock to realize that she was looking directly at him. He felt sick, like she could walk right out and get him. They burned rubber when his friend snapped out of it, and they screamed at each other all the way down the road about what they saw. He called me right after to explain it, but I was with my own friends and not really willing to listen at the time. What messes me up is that my mom thought he had a psychotic break. He went into his room and cried all night at the Airbnb. She thought something had happened with his girlfriend. My brother is not a crier. I haven't seen him do that since we were little. When we got together and talked about it, his eyes teared up then, too. He said he didn't know why, but he knew that she wanted to kill him. He drew a picture of her. It's not great, but it still fills me with the deepest foreboding. It took me a while to realize that I saw her too, just once in my bedroom almost 5 years ago. Suddenly it made sense. I knew it didn't feel like a woman, but it felt feminine, like something pretending to be a woman. My ex brought this up today. We dated all through high school and had a few experiences together that she recounts as her only paranormal encounters. I would love to still think that this was my own delusion, but it was shared by way too many people. Maybe a few things can be explained, but most of it truly can't. It has affected me so deeply that I'm still terrified that if I think too much about her, she'll follow us, a state away. I had a dream last night that I was being shown a series of gorillas in cages. In the dream, my brother told me that they had developed new technology to allow me to feel the touch of their hands through the cages. Sort of like the suits in Ready Player One. Weird dream logic. Anyway, I'm being dragged through the enclosure and one of the gorillas strokes my head, neck, and back. The thing is, I could actually feel this sensation in my body. I have never, ever felt anything palpably in a dream. My reaction to the sensation was a deep-set revulsion. The creepy thing is that it felt like there was a creature surveying my sleeping body, stroking it like a piece of meat to play with, while imbuing my dreams with an excuse as to why it was happening. Stranger still was that when I opened my eyes after the dream, I could feel this huge hand cupped over my mouth. I felt completely powerless to the creature. It was as though it had little tangible intelligence, but I could feel its feral nature enjoying the moment. It felt like something had lain down behind me in bed. Every time I opened my eyes, I could feel its massive hand over my mouth. Chalk it up to the mind playing tricks, or whatever. It was creepy and intimidating. This took place in the summer of 2010. I was with my family and we went down to the USA for vacation that year. We stayed at the hotel we normally stayed at, which was a Red Roof Inn. As we walked in, something felt off about the room, and I thought to myself that it must be just nothing. Over the next few nights, always around 3 in the morning, my mother and I would hear a knocking against the wall. At first we thought, oh, maybe it's just the people next door. However, the room was empty, and we thought nothing of it until it kept happening. I was wondering, could it possibly be haunted? My mother, being super into the paranormal and believing in this as I do myself, we decided to take a statue of the Archangel Michael from my dad's dashboard. It was super small, nothing big, and the next thing you know, we never heard the knocking for the rest of the trip. So it is possible that the room was haunted, and after doing some reading, we think that it could have been a poltergeist. I don't think this was paranormal, but it felt so real that it undid many of the knots in my heart. My father passed away 21 years ago, when I was 20 years old, leaving behind his mother, my grandmother, wife, my mom, and a daughter, me. 2 years before his death, my father had urged my grandmother to sell her small home and shift with us so that we could look after her in her old age. He built a decent house, considering he came from a very poor background, that we had to sell off after he passed away. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago. I often used to think about how our life would have been had he been still alive. He was an honest man, but in a powerful position. When he passed away, I was still in college and unmarried, with no exposure to the outside world. Had he been alive for a few more years, I could have used his guidance to fulfill my career plans. He was the only earning member of the family. After he passed away, nothing remained the same. We all struggled financially, emotionally, and ultimately physically. Then I got married to a verbally, financially abusive man. But I saw this dream only yesterday, never before it. I had not been thinking about him or of any of my difficulties before I went to bed. In the dream, I was in my grandmother's house, which again we had sold 23 years ago. She had passed away, but my father was alive. He was sadly looking at the empty house from his childhood. I asked him what he planned to do with the house. He said he would probably sell it, but he sounded very sad as he said it. Then I suggested if we should keep the house and just rent it out. This way, we could return to it whenever we want and have a financial backup too. My father said that in the face of financial difficulty, we have a bigger home to fall back on. But he seemed relieved that he didn't have to sell his childhood home. When I woke up, I realized that it had all felt so real, as if I had lived an alternate life. It was what life could have been. I cried, but I also felt that I had been lucky to be able to live in that life. Does anyone believe in alternate lives here? Do you think my soul had made a trip to an alternative life somehow? I grew up in a haunted house, rather a haunted neighborhood. It's an old Air Force base that has since been recommissioned for college students and families that go to school on the outskirts of town. Growing up there, I have experienced many strange things, most of which I cannot explain besides it being paranormal. Even though I know a good bit about the paranormal or the occult, some of these entities proved out of my knowledge base. I've seen my little sisters double, seen multiple shadows in the house with a friend present, had things move around, knocks on doors when no one else was home or asleep, footsteps up and down the hallway, conversations that would mute when you got close to them, and so many other occurrences. However, one of the creepiest ones always happened at the main bathroom. It had a small hallway branching from the main hallway. It wasn't very long, but I never felt safe there. During the night, even as a growing adult, I would run as fast as I could because I feared what was behind me. I slowly stopped doing so because I realized that whatever it was got some kind of sick pleasure from it. It slowly started to not feel like there was a presence nearby as much, but was still there. One evening, as I'm taking a shower getting ready for bed, I hear a knock, but not from the door. It came from the medicine cabinet, so being the curious person that I am, I peeled back the shower curtain to see some of the fog having been wiped off of the mirror. I started to take a closer look when I saw a black, slanted eye with no skin around it start to peek its way into my line of sight. I quickly hopped back into the shower and sat there back against the wall, not knowing what to do. I eventually turned the shower off and hauled ass out of there, still dripping wet. The next time I saw this thing, I was walking down the hall after getting home from school, and I'm the only one home. So I start to do what male teenagers do when no one was around. I hear some scuffling like dogs running around, and a door open. I ready myself for someone to be home, and as I walk out of my bedroom door, I hear a, "Hey," but muted and not a voice that I knew. So I start making my way toward the front door with my back to the wall, as I felt I might need to dash back to my room for safety. My mistake here was that I was facing the hallway that leads to the bathroom. I move over bit by bit, and I hear another voice, one that seems to be coming from the living room, so I take another step. Then I see something in the corner of my eye, like a hand pulling back from a corner. I couldn't make it out at the time, but it didn't freak me out enough until I got into full view of the hallway with this thing standing there in a grotesque way. Black slanted eyes, no skin anywhere, black claws, and smelled something awful, more of rotting meat than rotting eggs. I froze for a second before I saw it flinch, a little like it was coming for me, and I dashed back to my room, slamming the door behind me, only to get 3 knocks every few seconds. I don't remember what I said, but it was something along the lines of, "I'm not going to be afraid of you. You can't get past this door." And then it stopped. I waited there until someone got home, to which I went outside for the rest of the day, making sure I didn't have to use the restroom at night for any reason. A few months go by, and I'm still uncomfortable with this bathroom and the hallway, but not as much has happened since, so my guard starts to slip. One night, I believe it was a Friday night, I was taking a late night shower. Everything was going as normal, wash my hair, face, body, when suddenly the lights go out. There was a storm going on in town, and we were getting the weak part of it, so I didn't really think anything about the lights. I stepped out to turn on the lights and see if the house actually had power. Sure enough, the house did have power, but the bathroom wasn't turning on, yet the exhaust fan was still on. That's when I started to get really worried and turned the lights on one more time, and with no avail, and decided to keep my shower going in the dark. As I got back into the shower, I could feel something breathing on me, on the back of my neck, my shoulders. I felt a few brushes of what I hoped was just my towel and not something else. As I'm getting out of the shower, I'm drying my hair off, and the lights come back on. Awesome, I'm thinking as I start to dry my face. When I pull the towel off, I look up and the mirror once again doesn't have fog, but the whole lot of it, not just one part. I looked up a little more and just saw the thing there, right behind me, making a smile of sorts, but its mouth was sewn shut, or so it appeared. I stood there for about 5 seconds, unable to move, before slowly feeling its claw on my shoulder close to my neck. Suddenly I became unparalyzed and again left the bathroom dripping wet, running to my bedroom door. I slam it shut, shaken and trying to gather my nerves. I hear a deep, yet simultaneously high-pitched sort of laughter, and then I heard the bathroom door close. I went to bed that night with the lights on, all the while hearing more footsteps than usual in the hallway. I've seen the thing twice more, but thankfully those experiences were nowhere near as scary as the one mentioned above, since I've learned to deal with it and how to protect myself. I haven't heard much of skinless humanoids, so this is one thing that has always stuck with me. This incident happened to me when I was 14, and I've told the story and gone over it in my mind so many times exactly as it happened that it feels as if it were just yesterday. My uncle, two younger cousins, aunt, and I had gone up to the Rocky Mountains to have some fresh air and watch the stars. We went up a lot back then, when you were still allowed to at night. Now that park closes at 10, sadly, and our adventures such as this one ended about 3 months after this incident. Those two things are somehow inextricably linked in my mind. I can't help but wonder. We all five piled out of my uncle's AMC hatchback, a tight fit, and stood around the car on the side of the dark road talking about life and joking about Mothman. Betty, my aunt, was the first to hear a noise in the woods across the road to our left, but we dismissed it as an animal, and the adults and I, being older and in on the joke, tried to scare the kids. But a loud crash came from the woods, when no one had thrown anything, nobody had gone over there, and I'd had my eyes on the whole group the entire time, which meant that none of us were laughing now. My uncle chuckled nervously. Let's get in the car. We got in silently. Something had changed. The wood was quiet except for the sound of the car itself toiling down the mountain, as something followed our car, moving the trees about 10 yards behind us on the driver's side where the mountains slanted down. Nothing but trees over here, I thought. What the hell could that thing be? Feeling the tension in the car, I took matters into my own hands and leaned out the back driver's side window intrepidly. It was still behind us, crashing through the trees and moving through the treetops, right after our car. My mind grew curious. Go faster, I urged my cousin Brian. He sped down the winding road, but the thing in the forest followed. I looked at the speedometer. 35. We could do this. Go faster, I said. It was keeping pace, but always just behind the car. I was livid that I could not catch a glimpse of whatever was big enough to make such a racket and bend the trees to its whim. I finally yelled at him to go faster, but again the thing kept up. Our tiny car was racing down the winding mountain road, sheer rock on one side of us, certain death on the other, our headlights the only things lighting the way down, as we sped out the gate of the park, turned, and peeled down the paved road toward town. The kids were in tears. Brian nearly was too. Betty was silent, something which, if you knew her, you'd know the gravity of the situation when she actually chooses to shut up. Brian was yelling back at me and asking me what that thing was as I crawled back into my seat and buckled up. No, I said dejectedly. I couldn't see a thing. Months later, I tried to talk to my family about the occurrence, and found that none of them even remembered it except Betty. They had blocked it out of their memories, I guess from sheer shock, the poor souls. Even to this day, my uncle and younger cousins don't even want to talk about it. Looking back now and having watched a lot of Bigfoot investigations since, it's a likely possibility that what I didn't see was a Sasquatch. However, there are things even weirder than that in this local area. This happened about 13 years ago. I'm currently 28 and my childhood dog died in early high school for me. This wasn't too long after. Upon looking up what this is, it was most likely a false awakening, but still gives me chills to this day. I shared a room with my older brother, who was a pretty heavy sleeper once he got there. He'd usually be up playing video games all night, and I got used to being able to fall asleep through the sounds of him yelling at COD players for using noob tubes and all that good stuff. One night I woke up feeling the foot of my bed sink in like someone was down there. When I looked, I noticed a small child sitting with his back toward me. The child seemed to be wearing a black shirt with white horizontal stripes. I immediately thought to myself, alright, fuck that, and went back to sleep. I woke up what felt like a few hours later, and he was now standing at the foot of my bed, facing me, holding my dead dog's head in his hands. The child was surrounded by an extremely dark aura, so much so that I didn't gather any details on skin complexion or anything. I immediately lost my shit and freaked out, falling out of my bed. This part creeped me out because the fall was very detailed. I knocked over an acoustic guitar that I had on a stand near my bed when I fell out, and my brother shuffled in his sleep due to the noise. When I tried to wake him up, he mumbled, half asleep, that we needed to get more Pepsi, not an encounter with him that would surprise me at all, and went back to sleep. I then scrambled back into my bed, all while this kid was just watching me, holding my dog's head throughout. I fell back asleep, and then had my real awakening that morning. The guitar was in its stand, and everything was normal. I ended up not telling anybody about this dream. The really fucked up part, and why this particularly bad dream still gives me chills, has to do with the fact that my dog was buried in my backyard, in a little side yard that always had some really weird energy to it. Months later, my friends and I were hanging out, and we usually smoke weed in my backyard close to this side yard area. We had made our way inside and were munching and watching movies when my good friend Joe said that he needed to run to the backyard and get his phone. He went out to get it with his usual demeanor, but I heard his footsteps running full sprint back to the back door into the house. His skin was pale, and he was visibly shaken up. I asked him what was wrong. His response, "Dude, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I just saw a little kid standing where your dog is buried." This story is from 2013. I travel a lot for work. Before COVID. And when I do, I stay at hotels. Sleeping in a different bed doesn't bother me, as I'm mostly a sound sleeper, and I'm used to it given that I've been doing this for a while. This was a hotel in the suburbs of Chicago. From the time I checked into the room, I think it was room number 413, I have never felt such a sense of dread, despair, and claustrophobia. I am a rational person, no history of depression or mental illness, so I explained it to myself that maybe the 13 in the room number was messing with my head. But I've stayed in other hotel rooms with a 13 in my assigned room number. I had also stayed at the same property every week over the last few months, but I had never felt this way. I pondered while lying in bed if I should call the front desk and ask for another room. I didn't know what excuse that I would give to them. Everything was great with the room. The shower was fine, the room was spotless, the toilet had no issues. It was a boring, predictable, clinically consistent room like any other Marriott property. No complaints on the Wi-Fi. I couldn't bring myself to lie to the front desk and ask to be changed to another room. So I told myself I was a rational man, a husband, a father, and a protector. I decided that I was going to stay put. The uneasiness didn't lessen, so I turned on every light in the room, took out all the Bibles from the bedstands, and set them next to me. I am not of the Christian faith, and not very religious either, but I felt like I needed all the protection I could get. So I played chants on loop on YouTube from my own religion all night at low volume until I went to sleep. I woke up in the morning, worked out, showered, and went to work. The night's experience felt like a fleeting memory during the day. I had a really fun rental that week, a Mustang GT, and it was so much fun the night's memory almost felt imaginary entirely. I came back from work that evening feeling a little silly about the night before, and went back to the room. In an instant, the same sense of unexplained dread and claustrophobia came flooding back. I just couldn't rationally explain it. So I went back to the routine from the night before. Lights on, chanting, Bible, Marriott Mormon Bible, all by the bed. Next evening, I spoke with the bartender and asked him if he had heard any weird complaints. He said he hadn't, but he'd ask around. When I came back the next week, I got a different room, but I checked in with the bartender. He said he had done a little digging over the weekend and picked up on gossip from the other hotel staff that some of the cleaning ladies didn't like that room and even that corner of the 4th floor. He was intrigued enough that he brought along a sensitive friend of his from his Episcopalian church and said that when she opened the door and had barely taken a step inside that she just made a 180-degree turn and came right back out. She couldn't even go inside and said that it felt heavy. The bartender said that it was enough to spook him. He said he just stood in the corridor and refused to go in after that. We kinda had a laugh about it and figured that we would Google the property address to see if there were documented murders or suicides, but there was nothing. The property changed hands a few times. There was a nearby fire with some deaths, but nothing notable as far as Google search goes. I didn't think much of it, but I have stayed more than 2,000 nights in hotels since the fall of 2013, and I have yet to experience that fear ever. I continue to rethink about the memory of my experience, trying to recount the details about the room, the week, maybe the mood at work, just so I could find something rational to explain what I had felt, and I have been unable to. A few months back, really closer to a year ago, a friend of mine suggested that we do something interesting with our night for once. He told me about how he had been to one of the city's cemeteries after dark a few times, and that it terrified him, but in that sort of way that makes it worthwhile. I was a little against it at first, because the cops like to check on the area often, and there was no way we were going to be walking into the graveyard sober. Of course, however, my mind changed when we got to talking. You know about the witch? He started cracking a grin. I think so. I had heard very little. Remind me, just in case. So there's supposed to be this witch or ghost or some crap, and I know right where the grave is. Jesus, alright. I don't know exactly what I believe, but I know that the place is messed up. He paused, thinking hard. I said, I honestly don't believe in anything, but a dark graveyard is scary anyway. Definitely need to check it out sometime if we don't get to it tonight. He popped up with, oh man, I just remembered there are these dead kids. What? There's a bunch of graves together for this one family, and a bunch of them are these kids. That spot is extra creepy. They're all old as hell, from like the 1800s or something. Well, I guess we gotta go see all of it. We pulled into the lot when the sun was setting and decided to smoke a little bit in the car since we had time anyway. As we smoked, the whole place emptied out, and we were the only ones in sight. By this point, we were at a comfortable level of dissociative perfection, so we brought just a little bit of it with us. And, of course, my pack of cigarettes, which is no longer a habit of mine, but at the time was a means for managing stress. So, off we went, with a bit of sun still shining and one single truck riding through the cemetery. We figured it would be good to wait for the truck to leave, assuming it was a worker watching for any unwanted guests. Although they had left the gates wide open, we were a little unsure of the legality of being around after dark, and a little bit uneasy about some psycho employee ratting on us and getting us caught with what we had. After about 10 minutes and 3 or 4 rounds of the truck passing by, we figured it would be smart to just go ahead and hide wherever we were if he passed by us again. We made our way down the main hill that leads into the center of the cemetery, and we noticed a chill that seemed to pass as we entered the real part. I passed it off as a weird current made by the creeks and the cooler air in that area, but a part of the primal fear that remained in the back of my mind made me question my devotion to reality. There were a few times where we had to hide behind a tree as the truck made its way back around, and then we would make a few more minutes of progress. As we began to become too close to sober, we imbibed a bit more. Another 30 minutes or so passed, and we had decimated almost our entire on-hand supply. We also had no clue where we were. As we wandered along the dark, winding roads, we started to get concerned about our phone batteries. His phone was worse off than mine, being near dead already, although mine was hardly doing better. After deciding to keep them in our pockets for the time being, the dark and discomforting silence started to make both of us paranoid. It was, of course, a bit heightened by our habits. We also noticed something else that was upsetting. We had started to go around in circles. As we realized this, I had the first real wave of fear for that night come rushing over me. I could swear that someone was inside one of the mausoleums with their face just barely out of view and moving around in the shadows. Dude, do you see that? On instinct, I grabbed for my inhaler. What? What the hell are you talking about? My friend said. In that, right there. I looked toward the window rather than pointing. I swear to Christ, I just saw someone in there. I saw the shadow of a face. My friend brushed me off. You're just freaked out because you smoked too much. It's nothing. Come on, we need to get to the witch, and then we can get the hell out of here. You still want to go see that? Well, yeah. If you don't want to, that's cool, but I'm gonna. I mean, alright, I'm cool with doing that, but I'm just getting a little out of it. About 3 cigarettes and another hour later, we heard something unnerving. At first, we assumed that it was a bunch of drunk teenagers, based on the volume and range of noises being made. Walking further, we found a sign for construction, and being high, we thought it made perfect sense that a group of construction workers must be around. You know, for some good nighttime, silent construction work. Then the voices began to get a bit too quiet for our comfort. We booked it, barreling in no real direction, and somehow ending up at the place. Here it is, my buddy exclaimed. This is it? I looked to a massive circle of tall, dry grass. Is it in the middle of this? No, man, he replied. It's way in the back. Come on, I'll show you. I put another cigarette to my mouth with a slight tremble in my hand and followed him through the pitch black and to a large stone structure in a patch of dirt. It was the family he had mentioned, and it made my stomach turn. The cold, rushing wave of fear came back, but it was too late to change my mind. We walked onto the large stone slab and then around it. As we walked around it, he pulled his phone back out to read the headstones. I was nervous with his light being on at this point, after being near those people that we had seen. After a minute, he turned to me. You want to see the really messed up part? Messed up how? I asked. The forgotten children, their graves are back there down a skinny path. He motioned toward the trees. You down? Well, I said, I've got my smokes. Let's go. We looked at the graves, and my stomach turned, but I was unsure of why. I disliked the idea of dead kids, but my demeanor would never call for me to feel as sick as I did at that moment. Then my friend flipped his phone light back on to read off the names and dates. I started to really become anxious at that point, even voicing it. I scanned the woods, unable to see anything. My friend told me to just calm down, that the people we had seen had probably left by now. Then we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the woods. At most, it was 50 feet away. It was an unusual scream, aggressive almost. It didn't sound as if someone were hurt, but more that they were threatening us. I was sure at the time that it was a woman, but the hopeful side of me likes to imagine that we just heard some animal. As we paced back down the path toward the stones at the base, I pulled a few cigarettes from my pocket and began to light them like crazy. This was pushed further by my friend stopping to read more stones as we saw no one following us. Within 10 minutes he had had his fill, and we continued back into the main area. After even more walking, we passed a group of cars parked in a grass patch. We assumed they must have belonged to the group of people from earlier, but we began to wonder why more than 1 or 2 people would be there for so long. Then we got lost for real. Deep in the back of the property, we found the witch's spot, but nothing of interest, so we decided to head back. By now his phone had died, so we used mine to get a map up. We had 30 minutes of walking to get through to get to the car. Halfway back, we started hearing voices again, loud and brash. However, as we got closer, they got less energetic. I peered ahead and froze, grabbing my friend and shushing him. I could see 3 large shadows right down the path from us. I also forgot my phone screen was on and heard something I'll never forget. "Wait," a deep voice murmured. "Do y'all see that?" "See what?" A second man joined in. "That, right there." The silhouette of his arm pointed directly to us. That light. I slapped my phone screen against my torso, panicking in an attempt to turn it off. Both of us held our breath, staying still as statues while that group kept discussing. "Go check it out then," chimed a woman's voice. "Or are you too scared?" "Why don't you stay here and check it out while we leave?" "Oh, screw off," she teased, in a way that helped me think they were decent people. We started to shimmy toward the patch of graves to our side, hoping they would forget about us and leave like they had said. But then we saw what kind of people they really were. The first man hushed both of the others, and nearly gave me a heart attack. "Let's get 'em." Both men darted toward us, but we were out of sight by then, low to the ground by the hill that we had run across, hiding. We heard them making their way around the area, and we somehow circled behind them, making it out. Then we heard cars starting. For about 20 minutes, these psychos circled through the paths looking for us, and it cost us another half-hour overall. Exhausted, we made our way to the entrance, with an empty cigarette box, an empty bag, and a little bit of paranoia. We got back to his place and spent at least another hour talking about how insane that all of it had been. And then we had a thought. A ridiculous but unnerving thought. What if we saw nothing at the witch's spot because she had been in the woods by the family? And then an even worse thought popped up. What if the scream wasn't aggressive like I thought, and those people had done something to someone right near us? Whatever really happened, I know one thing. I'm never going back there without a full group of friends and fully charged phones. I'm an atheist, not very superstitious. But my family are big believers and have always claimed that our house was haunted. So about 2 hours ago, I fell asleep in the guest bedroom. Everyone avoids that room, but I like the ambience, so I've been spending a lot of time in there lately. I should probably note that there's a mirror by the bed. So first, I thought my mom walked in, and I remember saying, "Get out!" I know I heard the door open. I just asked her if she went in, and she didn't even know that I was taking a nap. Then, as I was sleeping, I heard whispering and scratching sounds. I started remembering things that never happened, and I could envision a lady with black hair sitting on the couch in the room. I knew I needed to get the hell out of there, so I tried waking up. The dream was so vivid that I thought I did wake up. I looked around the room, and written in red everywhere was murder, death, etc. There were also red tally marks all over the walls. There was a doll on the floor, a life-sized cloth one. And that's when I knew I was still dreaming. Suddenly I look over to the couch, and there she is. It was the lady with black hair. I tried waking up, but at this point I was experiencing sleep paralysis and I couldn't open my eyes. Finally, I woke up for real and ran out of that room. I don't ever want to go back. Anyone have any ideas on what happened? Am I overreacting? Edit. Okay, I'm getting freaked out now. I just woke up. It's 5 a.m. To another dream. This time I was in a normal world and felt like I was being watched. I kept telling everyone, but they wouldn't believe me until I fell asleep in the dream. Something or someone pulled the blankets up and laid down next to me. I'm not joking. Someone please help. I don't know What's going on? I had a gut feeling that it was that thing again. I woke up and had to call my mom to come in. This is getting weird. For someone who doesn't believe in God, I want to call an exorcist. So about 15 years ago, I was living with my ex-girlfriend, my sister, and her husband in an old house not far from town. Within the first few weeks of living there, strange things were happening regularly. Lights going out randomly, noises upstairs. At one point, one of the windows at the back of the house was cut. Like someone had went in with glass cutters trying to break in, but gave up on it and left. Creepy stuff like that. That was bad enough, but things got pretty severe as time went on. One week in particular was truly insane. The first thing that happened that week was on a Tuesday night. Everyone was working, and I was home alone watching TV when I noticed that our cat was acting really weird, backed into a corner, and arched up as though she was scared. When I went to get up, the electricity went out in the house, and it was pitch black inside. The second that happened, I heard really loud footsteps running down the stairs toward me. I got up and braced myself for whatever it was, but there was nothing. I gathered myself and went outside to the front garden to check if the other houses' lights were on, but my house was the only one that was dark. I went to the fuse box to reset the trip switch, and all was back to normal. A few days later, I think it was a Tuesday, we were all sitting in the living room watching a movie and eating a pizza. The lights were on, there was a good atmosphere in the house, when out of nowhere, a massive bang happened upstairs. We go up to check it out, and I went into our bedroom and saw that my bedside table was in the middle of the room. But the worst and last thing that happened to me was on a Saturday night. I'll never forget this. It still gives me chills when I think about it. We go to bed, everything's normal. We watch a bit of a movie and fall asleep. I wake up facing the wall and glance at the alarm clock. It reads 3:13 a.m. I turned over to go back to sleep and saw my ex standing in the center of the room. Confused, I begin to sit up and ask her what's wrong. But as I start to sit up, I realize my ex is asleep in bed next to me. A surge of fear runs through my core, and I'm frozen to the spot. My eyes adjust, and I just barely make out the figure. It was a young girl in a nightdress with a cartoon character on it, soaking wet, with her head looking down at the floor. I could hear the water droplets landing on the carpet, and I'm just sitting there totally in shock, unable to believe my eyes. After a couple of seconds, her apparition melted away and faded out of sight. I got up and turned on the lights and tried to tell myself that it was just a night terror or something, but the problem with that was that there was a wet patch where she had been standing. We moved out shortly after that, but I can still picture her to this day. Creepiest thing I've ever experienced. So I've been doing some spirit box investigation at the house I share with my fiancé. The last 2 nights we've done this together, we have discovered that there are 4 spirits in our home. Bob is the calmest one. When I mentioned that we spoke to a spirit named Bob in the house, my fiancé's cousin mentioned that Bob is her grandfather who passed. His name is actually Robert, but everyone just called him Bob. Mind you, we share the house with her cousin and uncle. Knowing that Bob isn't a threat, I've gotten the other names of the 3 spirits left. Those being Toby, Eric, and Melissa. The female spirit, I can't say for sure if that's her name. Anytime I've tried to reassure the name, I don't get a response. And whenever I'm about to, it's like something is stopping her. She does indeed like to laugh, as she has done so 3 times in the last 2 days. Anytime I hear from her, she's giving a yes or no answer with occasional other sentences. Toby is, from what I understand, a good spirit, although I've seen him as a dark shadow next to our bathroom, and this was earlier today while I was home alone with most of the lights out. The main part of this story that I'm getting into now is Eric. So upon using the spirit box, about 20 minutes ago before the post, I had asked multiple questions, but I'm going to get into the more interesting ones. One of the questions I asked after I got his name was if he was a good or an evil spirit. I got no response, and then I asked if he was a good spirit. I get a response this time, and he says yes, very clearly. Since I know that demons can lie and try to trick you of what they really are, I decided to ask if he was lying to me. He responded once more by saying, yeah. I was then able to confirm that he is the one spirit who is demonic. Things started making sense at this point, as clearly today, when I was home alone, when my spirit box was on, I noticed our kitchen chair was knocked over, and I took a picture of it and sent it to my fiancée to show her. It also explained why I always felt uncomfortable and watched in our garage that we rarely enter now. I had asked him about both of these things, even trying to make sure that he wasn't the shadow figure in the hallway leading to our room. He told me that he wasn't, which led me to assume it was Toby. He did reply to me that the garage is where he hides at. Most of the talk that I had with him after was him saying, "Come." The female spirit as well was trying to convince me to go into our garage. At the time, though it didn't cross my mind that they were mentioning it, I was trying to ask where they want me to go. I didn't get any straightforward response about the question. I was told, leave me alone, or go, on multiple occasions today and tonight. Upon ending my spirit box session, I went to the kitchen to grab something to eat. I ended up feeling some weird sensation on the left side of my collarbone, almost like something had touched me or dug into my skin softly. I went to the restroom to comb my hair and checked my neck and person for any kind of marks. I ended up noticing that there was a fingerprint on my collarbone. It almost looked the size of a young male's hand, or maybe a little older. I wanted to capture a picture, but when I went to do so, the marking was gone. All I know now is that there is something evil here, and there are more spirits than me or my fiancé thought. My grandparents died about 10 years ago. They both died peacefully of old age and left an old house in a countryside. That house has a lot of great memories. My best Christmas and birthdays. Despite that, recently I've started having nightmares that would always have the house in them. Sometimes someone's chasing me, other times there are ghosts. It's always basically a horror movie scenario. Being religious, I thought it was about time to visit my grandparents' graves and light a candle. It's about a 3-hour drive, so I decided to visit them and crash at their house for the night. Well, I'm never doing that again. It was still bright outside when I arrived. I went inside to open the windows and clean up a bit. That's when I heard a weird sound. It was as if someone was walking in the room, but no one was there except me. I was spooked, but I convinced myself that there must be rats or other creatures in the attic. I managed to stay calm and rational, and spent the rest of the evening watching YouTube in bed. That's when the fun started. The internet connection is terrible there. You kinda have to walk around the room to catch 4G like some sort of Wi-Fi. Like many times before, my internet lagged, and I ended up sitting in silence. This is when I heard it, loud and clear. There was someone in the kitchen, and they turned on the light switch. I was sure it was that switch, because whenever you turn on the light in the kitchen, it made this loud click sound. I literally froze. I was in the middle of nowhere, and I was about to be killed by some maniac. All the knives were in the kitchen too, and I only had pepper spray in my bag. Then the intruder started walking, slow steps as if they were just wandering around. I thought I will die from fear. And I didn't know for how long that I was frozen, but it really did feel like forever. I was literally waiting to be killed. I don't know how much more time passed, but it was long enough that my muscles started spasming from being so intense and not moving. I gathered all courage, hoping that the intruder had left, and somehow managed to go to the kitchen. The light was on as expected, but the person had already left. I ran to the door, expecting to see it wide open, but to my surprise, it was shut down and locked, as I had left it. There was no sign of entry. I'm never going back alone. I've had a few unexplained experiences over the decades, but the Gold Hill Hotel is my favorite spooky tale. I was staying the weekend at the hotel with friends and my then boyfriend. It was a really memorable weekend because it was the Christmas holiday season and the hotel was decked out. We were all drinking and it was quite festive. There was a female jazz singer from San Francisco who was staying at the hotel and who played carols on the piano. My boyfriend went up to the room before me and passed out drunk in the bed. I followed not long after. Later that night, I awoke suddenly to someone jerking the blankets off of me. It was the force of the jerk on the blankets that woke me up. I immediately looked over at my snoring, drunk boyfriend sleeping on his side, and then down at the blankets themselves. They had been pulled down to my waist, and down off of him. I slowly pulled them back up and curled up next to him. I slept very little the rest of the night. The next day, I asked him if he recalled anything unusual, but he didn't, and poo-pooed my experience. Later, I found out that we were staying in one of the rooms that visitors commonly reported having blankets pulled off of them. I can't recall the specifics of the ghost that actually haunts the room, but I sure do remember that moment when the blankets were laying down below my waist and pulled off of my boyfriend, and realizing that maybe we weren't alone in our room. This is my story from about 4 years ago. I was on a camping trip with some friends when we decided to go a little bit further into the forest to get the best location at the river. We had some beers and went swimming. When it started to get dark, almost all of my friends wanted to go home. Only my buddies Flo and Laura stayed with me. We lit a fire and continued to drink beer. After some hours, I felt like I had to go to the toilet. No problem, even had toilet paper in my backpack. Our camp was located right at the river, and a big field of high grass separated us from the forest. I decided to go to the high grass right in front of the trees, so I grabbed my phone as a flashlight and grabbed the toilet paper and went in the direction of the forest. It was pitch black, and because of the branches of the trees, I couldn't even see into the forest with my flashlight. So I sat down with my back to the forest and started doing my business. I was about 160 feet away from my friends now, and couldn't even hear them talking anymore. When I was almost finished, I heard a sound coming from behind me. It was like the rustle of dry leaves or the crackle of branches. I know it's the kind of horror movie stereotype. I stumbled and said, "Hello? Who's there?" 2 or 3 times, but no one answered. I thought it might be some kind of animal, so I screamed as loud as I could. But to my horror, this thing got even closer. I finished as fast as I could, which still felt like an hour to me, while the sound came closer and closer with each passing second. When I stood up and started running, the thing was so close that I expected it to grab me from behind as I tried to escape. So I ran as fast as I could, screaming and crying. When I arrived at our camp, I told my friends everything. They didn't really believe me, but they were pretty scared themselves. I was 17 at the time, big and muscular, and normally not the type of guy to cry. But this thing made me cry, and it would make me again. I could not sleep at all that night. I sat in my sleeping bag, the river to my back, while staring into the direction of the forest. There were no sounds or anything, just the sound of the wind and darkness. In the morning, we packed our stuff and made our way home. I won't go anywhere near that forest anymore. Jokes were often made about me, but I know what I heard, and I get the shivers right now just while writing this. In Germany, we have no dangerous animals living in the forests, but every animal in our forest would avoid contact with humans, especially when you shout at them. I am on an extended stay at a hotel away from my home for military reasons. The first 2 weeks were fine, but now I've been waking up between 4 and 5 a.m. every night, feeling like someone is watching me from one specific side of the room. Last night it started around 10 p.m. and nearly kept me up all night. I only feel this at my hotel room, not when I go home on my off-duty days. I live on the second floor, so it can't be coming from the window. It is only one specific side of the room, which is a little unsettling. Last night it got so intense that what little sleep that I did get was with the light on. I have a history of sleep paralysis and other sleep issues, but this is something that I have never felt before. I have had multiple experiences with the unexplained and paranormal side of things, but this just seems different. Could this be my own paranoia? In high school, my friends and I knew a guy named Gene. For whatever reason, Gene had a habit of telling extremely tall tales centered on himself, as if he were trying to make himself look cooler. The most repeated one was his claim that in a nearby ravine, a coven of druids practiced and were schooling him in ancient magic. He always played them straight, as if they were unquestionably true. He never had any evidence. While taking a walk one night, I happened upon a construction site. Being heavily into urban exploration, I explored the heck out of that site and, upon leaving, tipped over their porta potty. I was still a bit immature, and I thought it was funny. After that, whenever I found one, over it went. One day I told some friends about it, and Gene, ever the showman, chimed in with, "Oh, that's nothing. I like to burn them down." Arson was most assuredly not our thing, and we knew that Gene was full of it, so we were just surprised when, calling his bluff, he offered to prove it by showing us the fruits of his labors. 5 of us piled into the car, only one of us had a car, and followed Gene's instructions. The site was in a rural area with lots of big hills and dense forest, common in the Pacific Northwest. At a sharp elbow on a 2-lane road was a gravel turnoff leading maybe 100 feet into the woods to a gravel parking lot. This was the starting point for a number of hiking trails. There were no lights there, and the street light out on the road didn't show very much through the trees. Also, there were no other cars. One of the trails began past a gate that was designed to keep off-roaders from the trails, and it took a sharp left turn from the back of the parking lot. The porta potty had been about 30 feet or so up the trail, and on a later visit by day, we found out that Gene really did burn it into a puddle of blue goo. That night, we didn't make it there. We had a couple of flashlights, and we all started up the trail as a group. As far as I can recall, we never heard any noises, animal or human. We got about halfway to the spot, then all of us stopped walking. Someone whispered, "Do you feel that?" And we all bolted down the trail, piled back into the car, and got the hell out of there. Once on the road, we compared thoughts. I felt what everyone else did. The deepest, most intense, raw fear that I have ever endured. It was like we suddenly faced impending death. It clearly indicated I need to leave right this instant. I can only guess that there might have been a cougar or something, as they've been known to attack hikers, but we saw and heard absolutely nothing. I've read that if a little voice in your head tells you to do something, it's a good idea to listen. Part of me wonders if Jean's porta-potty fire pissed off some forest spirit or something. I've been back to that trailhead a few times during the day to show friends where this happened. I've also brought a friend who's quote-unquote sensitive, as they say, and they didn't pick up anything. I've had a few odd experiences, including seeing a couple of ghosts, some strange lights in the sky several times, and some other stuff. This is the only unexplainable experience that I've had which was deeply scary. Since I was 18 or so, I've been having dreams where I know it's a dream, but I cannot wake up. Once, I dreamed that I was sleeping in my bed at my parents' house, and suddenly I woke up in the dream, and everything was normal. TV on, door slightly open, but there was a weird feeling in the room, which I ignored. I tried to get back to sleep, but my conscience told me to turn my head to the door, which I did. It was slightly open again, but this time it was opening a little more every second that passed, and a dark presence was on the other side of the room. At this point, I freaked out, jumped out of my bed, and tried to get out of the room, but something was holding me back, and the path from my bed to the door seemed eternal. Suddenly, everything stopped, and I woke up again in the same position I dreamed of first, TV on, door slightly open. I was still dreaming, and the same thing happened again. Door slowly opening, and me trying to run away from the room through a never-ending path from my bed to the door, with a weird feeling of someone watching me all along. This was a cycle that happened a number of times, that I can't remember, but it was more than 4. I knew I was dreaming, but could not wake up. I was really scared. I tried to wake me up by yelling or hitting me in the dream. Nothing worked. I remember that in real life I was not in my parents' house, and therefore I was not in that bed. At that moment, when I remembered that, I woke up. I dreamed something like that a couple of weeks ago where I couldn't wake up even though I knew I was dreaming. I have no idea why this happens. I lived in Adams, Tennessee growing up, from about the ages of 14 to 18. A couple of weeks after my family and I moved there, something unexpected happened. I was mowing on my dad's tractor with a big 8-foot wide back-end mower. I was going down a hill when my horizon line violently was thrown around as the tractor tires hit something. I disengaged the mower, pulled the tractor around at the base of hill that I had just gone down. My blood went cold as I looked up through the swath I had just cut, like a buzzer going down the middle of someone's head making a lane for the grass. In that lane were 4 Native American burial sites. My parents started reaching out to anyone who might be able to help us identify the graves. Anthropologists, historians, accredited people, etc. Those people unanimously agreed that these 4 graves were from the Trail of Tears. They corroborated this from what I remember because of how the graves were laid, very shallow, with a giant slab of stone where a gravestone would normally be. The fact that they were interned on a hillside to keep the water from sinking in and raising the bodies since they had to bury them so quickly, and many other reasons. I consider myself a very logically driven and rationally minded person. Basically, I let my empirical senses try to explain something before I'll open myself to other possibilities. Yet, there were things that happened to me and my whole family that we weren't able to rationalize with the scientific mindset, or with anything logical. Event 1 occurred when the activity in our house started shortly after the mowing incident. We heard heavy knocking and pounding on the brick outer wall of the house encircling the house. No matter where you were in the house, you could hear that sound. Some nights I would hear running footsteps accompanying the pounding. This activity happened nearly every single night. As the nights passed, I started feeling a heavy presence in my room. A suffocating one, like a heavy weight sitting on my solar plexus constantly. Whatever was happening decided to latch onto my sister and I. She reported tightness in her chest too, and would wake up violently screaming from scratch marks and pieces of her hair that had been pulled out. The scratches started happening to me as well. Event 2 is that things continued to escalate. One night I was letting my golden retriever go out to use the bathroom. We had a ranch-style house overlooking the Red River. The door we were exiting was on the back side of the house facing the water. As I open the door, I start hearing faint whispering, something akin to leaves being blown or scratching across the ground. I looked up at the trees to see if the wind was blowing, but everything was perfectly still. It was fall in Tennessee, so there were tons of leaves on the ground, and they were not moving either. The scratchy/blowing leaf noise continued, but as it continued, it grew closer and louder. It sounded like a language of some sort, like how you'd imagine an incantation or something nefarious in the tone of the sound. I looked down at my golden retriever. All of the hair on her back was standing up, and she was snarling like a rabid wolf, yet not barking, just kind of frozen in some sort of fear response. I started getting extremely nauseous and could smell sulfur. I was completely frozen when my dog launched herself through the door's threshold and started gnashing her teeth mid-air while snarling and chomping. The voices were now coming from directly in front of me. I could hear them as if someone were standing there just a foot or two away. I grab my dog and pull her quickly inside, slamming the door and throwing the deadbolt into place. The door and frame shook violently as a vicious pounding started hammering on the threshold. I ran with my dog to the middle of the house, flipping on every light along the way. We sat there alone all night until the sun came up. My parents were out of town supporting my sister in a competition. Ginger, my golden retriever, laid across my lap the entire night, pressing into me while she whimpered for hours. All I could do was pet her and try to calm her down, which was also helping me. This was impossible, though, completely. The entire night until sunrise, the back door was thumping. Event 3 happened when I was coming home from football practice. I had all my gear in a gym bag over my left shoulder. This is important because of how I entered the house. As I closed the front door behind me, I began sitting down the gear bag from my left side, which caused me to look right. The room when you first walked in was our quote-unquote library, where we had a leather couch, chair, piano, bookshelves, and a wooden rocking chair. There was something sitting in the rocking chair. My peripheral vision caught it first, the chair just going back and forth. As my vision centered on the chair, there was a humanoid-looking shape, head glancing downward at the book that it was holding. It had long black hair drawn down over its head and completely void of light. To picture what I saw, imagine the silhouette of a person in 3D form. The light coming in and around the edges of it seemed to be eaten up by the presence or void, as if the light spilled over the contour edges of the humanoid shape, like how black holes are visualized, almost exactly. It felt like I had jumped off of a bridge into ice-cold water. I blasted myself backward against the door, screaming, and fell down. As I was falling, I saw the void blur suddenly as it shot across the walls of the house and out through a huge bay window overlooking the river. My golden retriever was in the next room, and she came running to chase the shadow across the walls, barking and clawing at the plaster. After it left through the window, my dog came to see me and laid on my lap until my parents got home. Event 4 occurred while I was fishing with my cousin Jack on the river by our house. We were right on the bend of the river, so the moon would be shining through on both sides, racing out at 2 lines like a 90-degree angle from the house. super beautiful when you aren't on edge. The reason I bring this up is because there was a lot of light on the river that evening. Jack was about 10 or so at the time. He reaches up and taps me and says, "Does that lady need help?" I looked to where he was pointing, and there was a pale woman dressed in white clothes going back and forth picking up stones just to the left of us across the river. I had seen her many times before around the property, and whenever I would get close, she would disappear behind a tree or something. Knowing this, I told Jack as calmly as I could that it was time for dinner and that he needed to go up to my mom immediately. When I walked him up and made sure that he was on his way, I looked back and she was gone, but I could hear a splashing sound in the water below. When Event 5 occurred, it was myself, my dad, his friends, and some other family members who were staked out along the river bend on the gravel bar beneath the rise to our house. As usual, nothing out of the ordinary happened at first. It was July 4th, and we were actually having a really good time for a change. We were all spread out about 15 yards away from each other. Each man had a low-end gas Coleman lantern. As the sun was setting, my dad looked over at me like something was bothering him. He told me later that he felt as if someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water over him before it began. The sun had just gone down when this happened. In unison, all the lanterns were cranked up full blast, then just as quickly became barely aflame. And then the flames roared to life again, down to barely a flame, roared to life, and then they went completely out. Right as the flames went out, we heard the most God-forsaken scream by some woman across the river. Whatever it was kept on screaming despite our best attempts to call out to help. As her scream reached a crescendo, it sounded like what I could only imagine as a person's throat being cut interrupted her. The sound of a dead weight fall of a human body tumbled down the hillside across from us and splashed violently into the water. At this point, all the guys had their flashlights out. That's when something started swimming and splashing around in the water on both sides of the river bend. The splashing receded toward the opposite gravel bar, and whatever it was got out and started pacing back and forth across the rocks there. We were pointing all of our flashlights to where the sound was coming from, but we couldn't identify where it was originating. It's safe to say we were all running up the hill at this point. We all went inside the house, locked the doors, then gathered in the central living room. Nobody wanted to leave for fear of what might be out there. We stayed up all that night because the wall pounding was more violent than it had ever been. Bam, 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 all night like the ticking of some demonic clock. I didn't sleep for 2 days after this event. Event 6 came in the form of lost time. I was walking through the woods near the Bell Witch Cave. One moment it was completely sunny, blue skies, and about mid-afternoon. The next moment it was overcast and looked like it was maybe 4 p.m. I still have no idea what happened there. Event 7 was night terrors. Torture dreams, being held down and brutally drawn and quartered. Dreams of walking through the house and the void person placing their hand on my chest and pushing through my solar plexus, body violently shaking in the dream as if I were having a seizure. Event 8 happened as I visited the Bell House plantation marker in a tobacco field adjacent to my family's property. I brought friends to try and prove that something crazy was happening to my family. The rite of passage in the area is to go to the stone marker where the paranormal events happened hundreds of years ago, then dance on the stones saying, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch." I got them to promise they wouldn't do that while we went. Of course, the moment when we got there, one guy who doubted the legends in a massive way jumps up onto the stone marker and starts screaming, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch," as loud as he could. I got so upset at him. I'm the only one that knows the way back, so I said, "Come on guys, we're leaving." In this area it's known as the Tennessee River Valley, so there's tons of flowing water, etc. around these tobacco fields. The reason this is important is because of what happened next. We're making good time walking back across this crop field, hundreds of yards long. A mist starts rolling in from the river bends and begins to saturate the field. The temperature drops easily 25 degrees or so, and we start to see our breath. I begin to smell sulfur in the breeze. As the mist became a fog, it began. I started hearing this wheezy and deeply cavernous sounding breath all around us, like being inside a cave that was breathing. Out of nowhere, we started hearing these giant blasting sounds, and I realized something was walking on the chopped tobacco stalks. Side note, when they harvest tobacco, they use a machete and cut down at a 45-degree angle, leaving about 3.5 feet of brittle stalk poking out of the ground. When you step on said stalks, they disintegrate in a very loud way as they burst apart. This starts happening all around us, like an army of native spirits running around us like a bandwagon battle. The blasts were coming from every single direction in the fog. That's when I hear it. The deep cavernous noise turns into this giant sniffing sound, like some Lovecraftian beast smelling its prey just out of sight. At this point, I yell "run" in pure panic mode. We take off across the field, trying not to trip and be skewered on the stalks. As we are exiting the field and our feet hit the gravel road, my lower center part of my back suddenly explodes in agony. I look down, and there's a massive rock lying at my feet, and I realized that I had just been assaulted. By the time I got to my house and examined my back in a mirror, the bruise was about the size of a basketball and was already turning black. And now for event 9. I woke up outside at about 3 in the morning. I was lying next to the 4 gravestones on the property. The night was awfully cold, but when I woke up, I was soaked in sweat. I bought a replica of Ivan the Terrible and his son, an old piece of macabre art from Russia back in the day, and hung it up on my wall in a huge portrait behind me yesterday. It's a rumor or popular belief that the painting is cursed, and I've always been a fan of strange items and collectibles, so that's why I bought it. As I went to sleep last night, I was stricken with nightmares. Terrible nightmares. I dreamt I was in a camper with a friend and we sat down to watch a movie called Pendulum. It was a knockoff of Hellraiser. We began watching it and the computer screen just shut off, and we couldn't get it to turn back on, so we had a collective fuck it moment, and I exited the camper to go back inside to the house, whilst my dream friend stayed in the camper. As I came back out, still during the dream night, with a drink, I noticed blood splattered on the windows and rushed inside. My friend had been beaten to death, and Pendulum was pulling himself through the computer screen. After this, I woke up, and by that, I mean I came to a real-world setting where I was asleep on my couch last night. I attempted to get up and get some water, as I was thirsting after such a nightmare. I made it to the kitchen, cracked it open, and let it hit my lips, and then suddenly, I was on the couch, again. In my mind at that moment, I considered that I had actually woken up. I sat up and walked into the kitchen again, cracked open that same water, when suddenly the refrigerator opened beside me, and I knew I was dreaming then. I woke up on the couch again, real as day, except it wasn't, as I went to drink that water again, and woke up on the couch again. After this is where it really started to get frightening. I considered that I was stuck in a loop, except this time I went to get up for water and walked past that area with the painting, and noticed that it was gone. This let me know I was still dreaming, and that I had another false awakening. I woke up for the water once more and started across the living room when I looked to an open doorway that I hang colorful beads from, and in the dark room veiled by the hanging threads was Pendulum. That woke me again. This time I ran to the window and looked out to see cops rushing down my small street to the neighbor's house. My neighbor shot and killed her husband in the front yard 2 weeks ago, and that woke me up again. After waking up a few more times for water, I tried to go outside after another loop, except when I opened the front door, it was pitch black. Then car lights turned on and sped toward me. As I was about to get smacked with someone's F-150, I woke up again. At this point, I stopped trying to go anywhere and just kept trying over and over and over to slap myself truly awake. After looping for another 30 times or so, I eventually actually woke up and was relieved. I got that fucking water and downed it in one go. Myself, my younger cousin, and a couple of friends stayed recently at one of the most haunted places in Texas and America. As a kid, I had heard stories of this old hotel and the dark history behind it. In recent years, a few paranormal shows showcased and did some investigations there. When I saw in our local news that the Magnolia Hotel was opening back up for visitors to stay the night, I was stoked. When you stay the night, you get 2 rooms, regardless of whether you're staying by yourself or you're bringing company. Also, you get the whole second story to yourself for you to investigate. There is a door that separates the hotel, updated, side and the haunted rooms side. To be fair, the rooms that you stay in are haunted as well. The entire hotel is haunted. Needless to say, I recorded so much activity on tape and in person in my own experiences. The findings I have will raise the hairs on your body. I was hearing voices, seeing shadows, hearing footsteps, showing the EVP sessions and hearing our names. I actually got touched twice, and the second time was so chilling. We were outside of this room that had a ton of activity. My friend had the dowsing rods. She asked if there was a spirit, and 3 times it pointed directly at me. She asked if the spirit was next to me. The rods said no. She asked if it was behind me, and they said yes. At that moment, I felt someone grab my right shoulder and slowly move their hand down my back. I got cold chills and felt tingling and numbing for a good few minutes. I am planning to go back very soon. I am a sensitive. I attract ghosts, and I go ghost hunting quite a bit. I have other experiences from several places that are extremely haunted here in Texas and in other states as well. Me and my friends went into the forest that's in my backyard. We went at least 5 minutes deep into the woods, down to a stream. We looked across the stream and saw a log, or at least what we thought was a log. It might have been, but one of us pointed out that it seemed to have turned its head. We ran as fast as we could back out of there. This was during a sleepover. We went to sleep around 3, but I ended up waking up around 4 after hearing a noise. I saw a shadowy figure that immediately disappeared once I laid eyes on it. I haven't seen anything else since. It could have just been my imagination, but I could have sworn that I did in fact see it. And it had the same outline as what we saw from a distance earlier that afternoon. My friends and I told me that I was just being paranoid, but I don't think I was. So I checked it out again in the same place, and the log figure was gone. So I still feel as if that thing were not after me, but after one of my friends. 2 years later, and still, I haven't heard or seen anything of it. Although every now and then, I do get the feeling that I'm being watched. I've been getting a little less sleep, but I think that might just be the fact that my sleep schedule is trying to adjust, but I still don't know what that thing is, and whether or not it was real, or if it was just part of my mind playing tricks on me. But again, I don't think that that was it. Remember when I said I hadn't seen anything of it since? Well, I lied. The other day I went back into the forest and there it was, in the same position that me and my friends had seen it in 2 years ago. I brought them over there, and they confirmed that they were seeing the same thing. It did not look over this time, but I've had an uneasy feeling ever since. They started to stop with the feeling 1 year afterward, but when I saw it a few days ago, the uneasy feeling increased. I don't know what it is, or what it wants, but I don't like it. It's not anything I've seen in any paranormal YouTube videos or anything else about the paranormal, which leads me back to believing that it wasn't real. But my friends confirmed that it was real, and I'm not questioning what they said. So it was real, and it was scary. I hope the uneasy feeling goes down soon, and if the thing ever comes near my house again, I'm going to call the police. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the morning after the sleepover, I saw not footprints, but something else that I can't quite put my finger on. Something that no human foot could ever have made. I have no idea what it was, and don't plan on trying to figure it out. I can't get this experience out of my head, no matter how many years have passed. This happened way back in the early 2000s. I was in the 8th grade and we were on a trip. I stayed in a hotel with 2 other girls. One of them was my friend and another girl who we were just somewhat acquainted with. The first night in the room, during my shower, I felt like someone was behind me, like standing really close to my back under the shower spray. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. So I continued showering, but the feeling just got worse. When I finished my shower, I pulled open the curtain, and when I looked up at the gigantic wall mirror, I saw a grotesque face behind my right shoulder. It was gone within seconds. I think I stood frozen there for a whole minute before I practically ran out, screaming. The next day, we were getting ready to go out. The girl we roomed with said that someone was in our room last night. She heard the toilet flush, the sink turn on, but then nothing. No one entered the room. No one left. And no one else but us was in there to begin with. We know because we checked every nook and cranny after she told us. The second night, when we got back to our hotel room, I suddenly felt super sleepy, like I literally fell to the floor once I stepped inside. It was odd because I wasn't sleepy at all until we actually walked into the room. The other 2 couldn't move me since I had an extra 50 pounds on them, so they just covered me up with the blanket, put a pillow under my head, and left me there. Then my friend said that sometime during the night I had gotten up, used the bathroom, and crawled into the bed. But I don't remember doing that. In fact, when I woke up on the 3rd day, I was still on the floor. When I was young, my family was digging up the backyard, about 1 meter deep, and I found an old, rusty skeleton key. Me being a kid, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. It became my favorite toy. Most days I'd play with my Legos, Action Mans, and now my new key in my room. And this is when it started happening. I would have my bedroom door closed, and it would suddenly just open by itself and swing wide, slowly. This went on for months, and I didn't think anything about it really until I asked my mom why she kept opening my door, and she said that she hadn't. So the next time I was playing, I watched the door as it opened and yelled at it to go away. The door slammed shut, and my mom came running from the other side of the house to see what was going on. Fast forward to now, and I've started being able to see them. You know how you look at a light, and you get those wriggly things and spots in your eye? They appear like that. like an implant on my mind, except when you look around, they don't stay on that position on your eye. They stay on that position in space. I've gotten to the point where I don't need to verbally say anything to get rid of them. I just think about a way of getting rid of them, and they disintegrate or disappear. There are some, though, that are more powerful than others and take more effort. I just got finished getting rid of one at my girlfriend's house, and it was probably the hardest one yet. I had to picture the sun swallowing it whole, and watched as a miniature sun appeared in the room next to it and swallowed it as it was screaming. I've never heard sounds from them before, which is part of the reason I'm writing this. I've never told anyone about this. I don't think I'm crazy. I have a pretty normal life. I've never had any mental illnesses, and there's no history of any in my family. I'm wondering if there's anyone else out there seeing these things the same way I do. I have these dreams sometimes. Sometimes they're warnings, and other times they're just odd. I started noticing that they weren't normal when I was about 8, and I started having the same dream every night. My parents were freshly divorced, and my mom had moved into this yellow house. The heater didn't work, and every window was broken. She wouldn't allow us near the windows because she was afraid we'd get cut. This house was mostly normal during the day. The buzz of the fan above the stove while Mom cooks, me and my sister playing, the TV on, just seemed normal. But every night, that dream would come back. It wasn't a bad dream, just one that I really don't get. A native man, who looked like he was probably a chief based on the headdress, would walk into the house through the front door. He would look at me for a long time before opening every cabinet and drawer, and then would exit through the back door. I had this dream for a week or two before telling my mom. But I went to her one day and I said, every night I have a dream that someone opens all the drawers, cabinets, and doors, and it's really starting to creep me out. She looked at me and told me that she had woke up and had to shut every door and cabinet and drawer that morning. Then, when I was about 10, my uncle was hospitalized. All of our family was staying together in one house so that we could all help each other out. Our uncle was a big part of our lives and really kept the family together. The adults went to visit him, and all us kids stayed home with one adult who stayed behind. When they came back, they told us very little about my uncle's condition. They just said he can't wait to be back home. That night, I dreamt that I went alone to find out what had really happened. I walked into the hospital room where my uncle was, and I said, "Hey, Uncle, it's me, your niece. How are you?" And he said, "Who are you? I don't have any family. I don't remember them." I spent the rest of the dream trying to convince him that I was real. It smelled like hand sanitizer and old people. I woke up crying and screaming. I don't know why, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. So I asked my mom and aunt, "Why did you lie to me? Uncle doesn't even remember us." They asked me how I knew. I dreamt another time that my mom was wearing all red. She was so confident and pretty, and I remember telling her in the dream that she looked really nice. And then her boyfriend came out. He started fighting with her, asking why she was wearing that slutty color. "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right? Now, you know what? I don't want to be with a woman that dresses like that. Have fun being single." I woke back up, and she was wearing all red. I begged her to change. I said, "Mom, something bad is going to happen," because I remembered how much she loved him, even if I hated him. She didn't listen, and a few minutes later I was hearing, "Are you cheating on me? You know I'll kill you if you do, right?" All over again. Things like this stopped for a while. Everything was peaceful, and I didn't read into dreams too much. Until last year, anyway. Last year I had a strange dream that my current boyfriend was in. At the time of this dream, we were only acquaintances. We had just barely met. The dream was unlike any of the others. because I wasn't all the way asleep while I was having it, and I found that I could not move. Other things happened too, but I'll get into that later. The dream starts with me walking to the bathroom because I had to pee. Then I make the decision to leave the bathroom door open because no one is home. I have the quick thought to myself, don't leave that door open, but I ignore it. It's gotten to the point where it's time for me to clean up and wash my hands, but when I look out the door as I'm about to get up, I see my current boyfriend. His head is tilted to the side, and he's saying, "She's here." He says it very creepily and matter-of-fact-like, but it doesn't sound like him at all. He continues and repeats himself. I say, "Who? Who is here?" But when I engage in the conversation he's trying to have, what he says changes. He starts saying, "Her heart is here." At that point, across the hall from the bathroom, my bedroom door swings open to show me a little girl. But she's not a little girl at all. She took my voice. I tried calling out for everyone, my dad, my sister, the neighbors. Nothing would come out until I called for my mother. But calling for my mother was useless. She lived an hour and a half away. I woke up calling for her. I figured it was a sign to visit, but we weren't on the best terms. Anyway, around the time Halloween was supposed to be celebrated, my cats started acting really weird in my room. I started feeling uncomfortable staying in there. I couldn't breathe in there after that dream. My cats would scratch at the walls, and sometimes would hiss at my closet for no reason. On Halloween night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dreams I was gonna have, so I took NyQuil and passed out in a record 17 minutes. I figured I'd be asleep all through the night, but I woke up at 3 a.m. I saw someone standing next to my closet. It looked like my mom, but I wasn't sure. I shut my eyes and refused to open them because I was terrified. When I woke up, without telling my mom anything about what had happened, I asked her what she had dreamt of, and she told me, "I dreamt I was standing next to your closet. Something's not right about that closet. Maybe you should come visit for a while and give yourself some space from there." I want to make it very clear, I never told her anything about this closet. I didn't tell her that I saw her when she dreamt she was there. I didn't tell her about the girl. I didn't tell her about the cats. So I came to visit after about a month, around Thanksgiving. I had been sleeping in Dad's living room or going to friends to avoid my bedroom. I couldn't wait to sleep in a bed. Everything at Mom's was wonderful. We had movie night, talked about things, and just got caught up. So when I came back to Dad's, I actually hadn't slept. I was so happy to be at Mom's, I had just stayed up the whole time. So when I got back, I was pretty exhausted. I went to my room because I was feeling better about it. I turned on my nightlight, still terrified of the dark, and opened my bedroom door. I will die in a fire before I shut that door when I'm inside the room, and laid down to go to sleep. Instantly, the dream took me, before I was even all the way gone. I felt someone hug me and start to kiss my neck. It felt like someone I knew, and I wasn't bothered by it. But the second I relaxed into the hug, it got tighter and tighter until I couldn't breathe. I realized my nightlight wasn't on anymore, and the faint glow from the hallway wasn't much. But it was enough for me to see the closet door open and these odd creatures come out. Short, undefined. Any lines that defined them were just white lines on their shadowy bodies. I felt that they were going to hurt me, and again I was terrified, but I just woke up, and then it was over. I looked over though, and I realized that my closet door was still open, and my nightlight was off, even though I had shut that door and turned the light on beforehand. I'm not saying we have a ghost, spook, or spirit, but something phenomenological is definitely happening in our home. The brief background on the home is that it's over 70 years old in an older part of our town. The previous resident was a well-respected attorney in the area, and he died here. We wouldn't learn this until after we moved in. The house was almost completely dismantled and rebuilt with new everything. Paint, electric, plumbing, drywall, etc. One floor, not a whole lot of square footage. An attic that has about 2.5 feet of clearance. Not long after getting moved in, my wife and I learned a little bit more about the house's history, and that the previous owner had passed away, and that it was quite some time after his death before he was discovered. We made peace with this information, and continued settling in. The first peculiar incident wasn't really that peculiar. It had been well over a year since the previous owner passed, but he kept receiving mail. A lot of mail. Fun mail, too. Magazines and newspapers with the subscriptions renewing. We remarked on the mail as being merely interesting, and for the sake of creating a tradition, we always kept the old attorney's mail for a day or two, in case he just wanted to read it. Eventually, this would trickle to a stop. The second peculiar incident caught our attention. After 2 months of being in the house, we decided to get newer, better locks for the doors. I had a new key, my wife had a new key. 2 extra keys went on the key hook. A few days go by, and my wife asked me if I had lost my key or if I had trouble locking or unlocking the door. I hadn't. She showed me the 2 extra keys. Both were still on the wire ring, and both had bends of about 15 degrees right at the key's shoulder. We agreed that this was odd, but we let it go with some loose rationalizations. The third peculiar incident started a little over 2 years ago, and continues still. Neither I nor my wife smoke. However, about once every 2 weeks on a random day, and usually after midnight, the distinct odor of warm cigarette smoke can be smelled in our living room. At first, we thought it was someone walking nearby, or a neighbor, or an odd or unfortunate combination of smells from a garbage can. We got some cameras, and pointed them outside to see what we could see. Nothing. The last time we smelled cigarettes was about 2 weeks ago. And we've had electricians check our wiring on unrelated matters just in case. The fourth incident relates to the second. 2 metal spoons in the silverware drawer were bent. Almost snapped. Aside from the cigarette smoke, it's been a while since anything has happened, until last week. For whatever reason, the attorney's mail is resumed and the 5th peculiar incident has occurred. I work out in the woods, and my wife now works from home in the company of our 2 cats. In a flurry of texts and phone calls, she told me that it sounded like someone was running around upstairs, as if they were rushing across the house to answer the phone, was how she described it. We've had squirrels in our useless attic and the occasional tree branch. The footsteps exceeded both of those. The 6th and most recent peculiar incident is equal parts mundane and intriguing. We have a favorite spatula. Yes, we do. Some of you reading this probably have your own favorite spatula, spoon, fork, pot, pan as well. We used the bright robin's egg blue utensil to make our Thanksgiving dinner and set it aside with the rest of the cooking detritus. That evening, and the following morning, the kitchen is cleaned and everything is put away. Sunday began the greater holiday baking season, requiring the favorite spatula. Except, it was missing. The ceramic container where the utensils are stored has everything else. Red things, green things, metal things, wooden things. Visual inspection of the surrounding area results in zilch. Every cupboard and drawer opened and investigated to nothing. We sadly conclude that after the big cleanup, it must have ended up in the trash. So we began an online hunt for its replacement. On Friday last, I get a picture of the utensils sitting quite happily amongst all the others. I was confused by this, since the evening before we had to use other tools instead of the missing spatula because it was missing. So, sometime after 9:30 p.m. Thursday and 7:18 a.m. on Friday, something that was missing for at least 5 days returned. So, here it is in order. 1. A confluence of strange coincidences. 2. Sleepwalking. 3. someone is managing to live in our attic. 4. That I and my wife are in a weirdly mutual prank cycle. Or 5. Something real is happening. If you have any ideas, tests, solutions, resources, or suggestions, I'm listening. Nothing seems malvoyant about what's been happening, but it's definitely happening. My boyfriend and I decided to take an impromptu trip to Gettysburg and booked a decently priced hotel the night before. The first night I fell asleep no problem, but the second night, not so much. He had already gone to bed, and I had just shut the light off. As soon as the light was out, I could hear paper or bags shuffling around on our TV stand, and I thought that he had gotten up to look for something. I looked up, and of course no one was there, but I instantly felt terrified and felt the presence of someone standing at the foot of our bed. It only lasted about a minute or so, and then suddenly there was a loud bang, like a door being slammed in the room above us, and the feeling disappeared. When we got home, my boyfriend, who doesn't believe in the supernatural at all, extremely reluctantly brought up how the first night that we stayed, he got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and immediately got creeped out and thought that someone was in our room. He went into the bathroom and felt like someone was standing directly behind him. Of course, Gettysburg has tons of history, but after doing some research, I haven't found much information about the hotel or what may have been there before. Whatever happened in our room didn't feel harmless, though. From as early as I can remember, I used to fall asleep watching old, reel-to-reel black and white cartoons on my wall, like Steamboat Willie. I clearly remember the jittery, shutter-like quality of the cartoon from the old reel-to-reel projector. There was no actual movie projector in my room. At night, I would wake up to someone tapping me on the shoulder. I had a usual routine that I followed when it happened, which involved burying myself under my covers and telling myself that I would count to 7 and then turn over to see what was there. Not sure if there's a significance to 7. To this day, I like to end things with 7. For example, I set my alarm at 6:27 and not 6:30. But anyhow, I would go through the counting routine multiple times. I wanted to see what was there, but I was a kid and didn't really want to see what was there. My mom would tell me that I just needed to confront it and tell it to leave me alone. It took years to build up that courage. I don't remember exactly how long, but I must have been in my early teens before I actually did get the nerve up to turn over right away and tell it to leave me alone and stop tapping me on the shoulder. Once I confronted it, it did stop. Then comes my baby sister when I was 15. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night quite often. Once she was old enough to talk, she said that she was scared of the hand that came up between her wall and the bed and tapped her on the shoulder at night. It is not uncommon for me to have dreams about shadow people or to have sleep paralysis. On this particular night, I had a dream about a red marble, and that an entity was tied to this said marble. I felt that I had to protect this marble and keep it away from people who were trying to get it. The marble bounced out of my hand, and I told the entity to roll it back to me, which it did. Here is the weird part. I remember in my dream picking up the marble, but all of a sudden I was staring up at the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a shadow person approaching, and it started to lean over me, looking down. At this point, I have no idea if I'm awake or if I'm dreaming, but I remember saying over and over again, "Leave, leave, leave, leave." But the voice started to sound deeper and deeper and not like mine at all. My boyfriend sleeping next to me shook me awake, and I sat up, calmed down, and went back to sleep. In the morning, I asked what had happened, and he said that I was talking in my sleep and that I had said a sentence that was all jumbled, so he couldn't make out what I was actually saying. This made me feel weird, because if I did sleep talk, I would have thought it would have been one word, over and over. I remember in my dream feeling uneasy and scared. Does this sound like I was visited? Or was it just a really bad case of sleep paralysis? Edit. I also forgot to mention that I told my mom about the dream, and what time that it had happened, and she said that she had had a terrible dream and woke up screaming around that same time. We sleep on different floors, so I didn't hear her do this, but she doesn't remember her dream. The area where I live is a heavily wooded Indian residential area, and we have no neighbors, and the closest town is about 15 minutes away. The only animals that come around are coyotes, black bears, sometimes wolves, and since I live in the southern part of Canada, there aren't any mountain lions that I've seen anyway. So a few nights ago around 2:50 a.m., I heard my dogs barking like crazy, and I got pretty annoyed by this because they never usually do it. It was hard for me to sleep, and I pulled out my phone to check the time, and like I said, it was almost 3. Since my bedroom has a window, I opened it to call my dogs back, and they didn't stop barking. I tried a few more times, but then I heard a sort of wailing, crying sound from the woods. I heard foxes can sometimes make screaming sounds, but this didn't sound like a fox's cry. I don't think it could have actually been a woman, considering, like I said, that we don't have neighbors. I tried telling my grandfather, but he doesn't hear it, and when I told my grandmother, she didn't want to talk about it since she can sometimes be superstitious. When I was about 5 years old, I used to have these scary, recurring dreams that always had the same old woman in them. The old woman had gray, curly, short hair, and she was always wearing a creepy black dress with lace on the hems. In the dreams, she would always be trying to scare me. It seemed as though she took pleasure in scaring me. A prominent one that I remember is her sitting on top of me whilst I slept, with a basket of flowers. She would just stare right at me. So only about 3 or 4 years ago, when I was about 16 or 17, that same exact woman appeared in my dream. Same scary vibe and everything. What is super creepy about this occurrence is that I hadn't thought about this woman or talked about her for so many years. It was totally random for that to happen to me. Plus, this recent dream was just as vivid as the others. Almost as though she was visiting me again through her own free will. Another thing that might not have anything to do with the dream is that when I was a child I had a black dress just like hers that would hang in my closet, and I didn't know where it came from. It always creeped me out because it looked like the scary old woman's dress. I can't remember where I got it, but I might have worn it to my grandmother's funeral, who died when I was 2 or 3. I should start by saying that I am sensitive, but have never known about or tried any of my abilities to sense the paranormal. I recently stayed at the Stanley Hotel in New York. After pulling onto the property, I immediately felt extremely uneasy and had a sense of dread. Just an overall bad feeling about the place. After entering the building, I started feeling nauseous and lightheaded like I was going to pass out, and weird stabbing pains were all around my head. Not a normal headache. As the night progressed, I started getting flashing images in my head depicting horrible, violent, graphic scenes of myself being stabbed and choked, and figures who were standing over me. I felt as if I weren't alone in my own head. I felt random bursts of anger and sadness and would want to either hurt the people that I was with or just start hysterically crying. I have never felt so out of control, like my head was in a fog, and everything that was happening was a dream, like I was there in my head, but I couldn't control my body. It has been 5 days since I left, and I still don't feel like myself. What happened to me in that hotel? Many years ago, I visited a secret bunker in England that had been turned into a museum. The only thing I knew about it beforehand was that it had been built during the Second World War. The atmosphere inside was kinda creepy because it was underground and very quiet, and there were mannequins dotted about the place, but that didn't really bother me. What creeped me out the most was a feeling of being watched and followed by someone or something that I couldn't see. During one part of the tour, I was leaving one of the rooms when a desk lamp suddenly turned itself off. I was the only person in the room at the time, and the lamp was behind glass, so nobody could get to it to switch it off. When I got home, I did some research on the bunker and found out that